This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning. It is 3 minutes after 10, and albeit that you tune into this programme every morning in the hope of having some joy and, of course, knowledge injected into your veins, I'm going to begin, if I may, with just a little moment of sadness. You think you know people, or you think you know your country, and when you come across a story like the hideous catalogue of abuse and racism and anti-Semitism of which Nigel Farage now stands accused by people who are reluctantly but bravely putting their names to their accusations, you think you know people, and you'd think that would sort of constitute some sort of moment of reflection, wouldn't you? Front page of the Daily Mail today, in an article written by a journalist who I have in the past admired, focusing on some nonsense about it ain't half hot mum that he used yesterday to try to dismiss allegations so hideous that a group of Holocaust survivors have now assembled to demand, or to politely request perhaps, that he apologise. You would think that even people who had perhaps spent the last few years tickling the toes of this sort of pound shop Donald Trump, or this colour by numbers populist would just pause, because you think that there are, what's the word that I want? You think that there are universal standards. I've seen the United States display the fact that there aren't. The things that you think your society is built upon, the things that you think civilization is built upon, the things upon which everybody more or less agrees, even if they furiously disagree about almost everything else. But it turns out that we do live in a country where senior members of the media are going to try to gloss over, dismiss, excuse, or even help deny memories of now a large number of people, of a man currently leading the opinion polls to become our next Prime Minister, making jokes about gas chambers, telling Jewish boys that Hitler was right. We will, later in the programme, I'm going to introduce you to the man who has started this particular ball rolling, but, as I explained to you yesterday, they are recollections and memories that he has been sharing for years privately. Only lately has he decided that it is his patriotic duty, if you like, or that it is in the national interest, just to make sure that people know exactly what they're dealing with Nigel Farage, because you're unlikely to find any of the interviewers who routinely tickle his toes holding those particular feet to the fire, albeit that he's still hiding from them, exposing himself only to a press conference yesterday, I suspect largely because Richard Tice came perilously close, if he didn't cross the line, to libelling Peter Ettedgui, who will be with us at 11:45, by accusing him and everybody else sharing their memories of being a liar. Funny how Farage just effortlessly slimes from claiming that it never happened, to claiming that it couldn't possibly have remembered, to claiming that it did happen but it was just banter and he could categorically remember everything, so his account was valid. And then this letter that he unveiled yesterday, which again I am deeply disappointed to find people treating with anything other than curt dismissal. An alleged letter from a man who considers the self-proclaimed misogynist and alleged sex trafficker Andrew Tate to be a trusted source, who disseminates and amplifies lies from people like that, up to and including the point where it prompts people to set fire to buildings full of entirely innocent humans. He cites a letter. Anybody with an ounce of integrity would take it with at least a pinch of salt. But a letter, he claims, from somebody saying, I never witnessed any of the things that you're being accused of, by over 20 of our contemporaries who have put their names to their memories, but I'm not putting my name to this. Somehow that is relevant. How? Was he following Nigel Farage around for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all day, all term, all year? There was, and I thought twice about reminding you of this because it's not very pleasant, but there was hideous sexual abuse visited upon boys at my school by monks who were in a position of enormous trust. I witnessed none of it. But the idea that I would write a letter to the child sex abuse inquiry suggesting that because I hadn't witnessed any of it, it didn't happen, or that the child sex abuse inquiry, or that the monks accused of raping my school friends would somehow take a letter from someone who didn't witness it as proof that it had never happened. Oh, but I'm required to remind you that there's a letter from a contempt. No, you're not. That's nonsense. It's the kind of pathetic redoubt that you're resorting to or reduced to citing, because even now you're not ready to admit that this man is everything that everybody knows him to be. The world is split into two when it comes to Nigel Farage. People who know what he is and are repelled by it, and people who know what he is and are not repelled by it. It's always been that simple. It's been that simple since, the founder of UKIP revealed that he had said they shouldn't bother having ethnic minority candidates because they were never going to win the N-word vote. That's the founder of UKIP, not somebody he was at school with, but the leader of the party that he joined when his city career didn't go in anything like the style that he thinks or believes that it should have done. There are two types of people, well, there's three. There are people who happily have very little idea who he is because they're somehow insulated from the national discourse. But when it comes to people who do know who Nigel Farage is, there are two types of people. There are people who are repelled by everything that he represents and people who are not. And if you want to pretend that he's undergone some sort of extraordinary moral and philosophical and political sea change since he was a sixth former, by the way, when he claims that this was all based upon things that he did when he was 13, he is lying because, again, the accusers, who are happy to put their names to their accusations, have reflected on the fact that when, for example, he reportedly set fire to a school register because there were 13 people called Patel on it and only 12 called Smith. That's in today's newspapers, by the way, lest you are struggling to find evidence of racism allegations being levelled at Nigel Farage in today's newspapers, as some people apparently are. He reportedly set fire to a school register because it had 13 Patels on it and only 12 Smiths. If you think that he's changed, you're going to struggle to provide any proof, aren't you? Is there anything else that needs clearing up? The idea that this letter, this alleged letter from somebody who thinks that because he didn't see something, it never happened, is in any way relevant to the conversation that we're having. We can clear that up. Apparently, I should also remind you, Bernard Manning, a dead comedian, is not in the running to become Prime Minister. The actors, writers, commissioning editors who made It Ain't Half Hot Mum are not currently in the running to become Prime Minister. Shouting Bernard Manning at people would not, in recent years, have constituted a valid response to hideous allegations. But in the world of Nigel Farage and the world of journalists who've been tickling his toes for years, because they're not repelled by what he does, they're not repelled by what he does, by what he is, by who he is, they're reduced today to saying, something else we need to clear up. It is perfectly possible, for the avoidance of doubt, as we demonstrate on this programme every week, to cover both the hideous allegations that Nigel Farage faces and the debacle that Kent County Council has become since they elected a Reform UK council. We've covered both of those stories in dizzying depths now for some months. But apparently you have to pick one. Did I get that right? You can only report, you shouldn't be talking about the racism and the anti-Semitism and the gas chamber jokes and the Holocaust survivors calling for an apology. You shouldn't be talking about that, but you should be talking about the mess that Reform are making in Kent. Say people who never really talk about the mess that Reform are making in Kent. Am I going mad, or is that what we're witnessing this morning? Why are you talking about this when you could be talking about that? Say people who never talk about either, or desperately don't want to talk about the thing they can't avoid talking about. Let me also remind you, because yesterday the mewling toilet duck started whining once again about the BBC and claiming that he was now going to boycott it. The most recent example I can find of him threatening to boycott the BBC if they didn't apologise to the fearless champion of free speech who believes that everybody should be free to ask questions all the time as long as it's him. The most recent example I can find was June of 2024, when he announced he would be boycotting the BBC if they didn't apologise. Spoiler alert, they didn't apologise. Anybody got any evidence of him boycotting the BBC? Because he announced another one yesterday, which I imagine will last about as long as the last one did. Let's run through the response that Reform UK gave us when we approached them last week about these allegations, and you can map just how disingenuous, dishonest and deceitful this whole episode is becoming. I can tell you categorically that I did not say the things that have been published in The Guardian, aged 13, nearly 50 years ago. I think that he is now saying he did say them, but it was just banter because Bernard Manning. Apparently, if somebody asks you a difficult question, what you do is you shout Bernard Manning at them. That seems to be the moral of the story that we learned yesterday at this ludicrous press conference that he only called because Richard Tice came perilously close, or indeed quite possibly did actually libel Peter Ettedgui, who will be with us later. So if somebody asks you a difficult question, like, I don't know, for example, what's the square root of 1046? This is what you do.
Bernard Manning. He's a very serious allegation.
Bernard Manning. A man who's dead, but who apparently is relevant to a conversation about whether a racist and a recipient of racist and anti-Semitic allegations, the like of which would once have stopped the traffic in this country, becoming Prime Minister, is somehow relevant to the antics of a dead 1970s comedian. And of course, Farage also complains endlessly about the BBC being woke, so presumably he wants these kind of programmes back on. I don't know, it's confusing. Let me run you through the apology. I can tell you categorically that I did not say the things that have been published in The Guardian, aged 13, nearly 50 years ago. The Guardian has published several things that have nothing to do with him being 13, but with him being 18, up to and including the letter. It's a response, of course, not an apology. There's been no apology whatsoever. The letter from a teacher describing him as a fascist who marched through the Kent countryside singing Hitler Youth songs. Isn't it interesting, he says, I am probably the most scrutinised figure in British politics. It's a slightly odd self-description for somebody who keeps threatening to boycott the media unless they apologise for saying hurty words. Having been in public life for 32 years, he's right. At the very beginning of those 32 years, the leader of the party that he joined said that he routinely used the N-word. And of course we know that he had meetings in that period of his life with some of the most hideous and toxic members of the far right that this country has ever produced. Several books and thousands of stories have been written about me, but it is only now that my party is leading in the polls that these allegations come out. He knows that's a lie. You know that's a lie. Everybody pretending that today you have to choose between covering the mess in Kent and covering these hideous allegations knows that it's a lie. But if you're not repelled by who he is and what he is, you'll pretend you don't realise that it's a lie. The allegations have been around for years. It's only relatively recently that people have decided they have little choice morally and patriotically, but to put their name to those allegations. And then he says, I will leave the public to draw their own conclusions about why that might be. Well, what he will do is leave the public and members of this profession to decide whether they're going to actually call out his lies or pretend that they're not lies at all. And as he does indeed remind us correctly, many people have already made their decision on that front. We know that The Guardian wants to smear anybody who talks about the immigration issue. Just a very odd thing to say, given that the Labour government is currently talking about little else. But, of course, the facts have never been things to unduly trouble Nigel Farage. The truth is that I have done more in my career to defeat extremism and far-right politics, which will come as news to people in the area where the council leader has just been outed as a white supremacist. More on that later. Oh, he's a member of Farage's party, just like almost all of the extremists in public life to have been outed in recent years. Many of those making these statements just happen to be political opponents. One, for example, is the current chair of the Salisbury Lib Dems. Yeah, but none of the others are. Some of them describe themselves as small C conservatives. Some of them describe themselves as having no politics whatsoever. But that doesn't matter because the facts are not relevant to this conversation. This is not the first time the desperate establishment has come after me, and it not will be the last. So you become a member of the establishment, do you, by dint of having gone to Dulwich College in the 1970s? Because that means you're a member of the establishment, Mr. Nigel I bank at Coots Farage. Nothing says anti-establishment, does it? Like whining to the media about having your Coots bank account taken away on the grounds that it might be doing reputational damage to the bank, because a lot of people were aware of precisely the allegations and reports that you're now claiming have suddenly emerged anew from the ether. Lie, 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 lie. So again, I categorically say that the stories being told about me from 50 years ago are not true. So what are they? Untrue? Stories plural, by the way. If they're untrue, why are they now banter? How can they be untrue and true at the same time, except in the weird world of Nigel Farage? How can they be lies and politically motivated lies and banter that everybody was doing because Bernard Manning? Or it ain't half hot, mum? How can that be? Of course it doesn't matter. All he has to do is provide the people who are not repelled by everything he is and everything he represents with just enough camouflage, no matter how flimsy it is. Think about how they dealt with Donald Trump's self-confessed sex offending. I think it was indeed Nigel Farage who described it as locker room banter, did he? locker room banter. You just need to give them enough camouflage to cover up the fact that they're supremely comfortable with sex offending, or with racism, or with anti-Semitism, or with jokes about the gas chamber. Even people who profess to be profoundly offended and disappointed by political opponents who indulge in certain types of behaviour give the mother of all free passes to the people who they... I mean, what is it you conclude from today's developments and yesterday's developments? That all of the people who are pretending that this doesn't matter are comfortable with jokes about gas chambers? All of the people who are pretending that this doesn't matter think that Farage has changed? A man who can barely open his mouth without blaming the ills of the country upon people who come from overseas, just as his ancestors did. He's back to the racist trope about school children this week, albeit in Glasgow, knowing full well that his most recent wife, his current girlfriend, and his 2 daughters do not have English as a first language. But because a bunch of school children in Glasgow don't have English as a first language, it's somehow a problem, a campaign point. Just don't mention my wife, don't mention my girlfriend, don't mention my daughter or my other daughter, none of whom have English as a first language. Just focus on the brown kids in Glasgow. Because we don't like bilingualism, do we, in this country? And then, of course, there's the well-documented catalogue of behaviour that proves this is anything but confined to his school days. This is why I mentioned at the outset that today is a moment of sadness. When Holocaust survivors call upon a public figure to apologise, how long ago was it? Was it Priti Patel? Was it Priti Patel or Suella Braverman? I think it was Suella Braverman who was asked by a Holocaust survivor to tone down her rhetoric when talking about refugees and immigrants. And she didn't. She refused. Is that the moment that this headline becomes debatable or negotiable? I lived in a country, I grew up in a country, I think even in the 1970s, when if a group of Holocaust survivors joined forces to call upon a very prominent public figure to apologise, everybody would have been on the same side, except massive anti-Semites, except Holocaust deniers, except people who were nursing hideous thoughts that they were too ashamed or frightened to air publicly. When I was growing up, and I was born in 1972, less than 30 years after the end of the Second World War, I'm pretty sure that if a group of Holocaust survivors had joined forces to demand that a public figure account for the memories of, in now I think over 24 school contemporaries, we'd have all been on the same side. But we're not, and I wonder why.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 22 minutes after 10, and I think that this all boils down to a fairly simple question, doesn't it? Nobody thinks he's changed. So it's just a question of how comfortable you are with the idea of somebody possessed of these views becoming Prime Minister. So you have to conclude that the Daily Mail is supremely comfortable, or at least the owner or the editor of the Daily Mail is supremely comfortable with somebody possessed of these views becoming Prime Minister. You have to conclude that many broadcasters, including ones pretending today that you have to choose between covering the mess that Kent County Council has become since Reform took charge in that county, or covering reports, for example, of Holocaust survivors demanding that Nigel Farage apologise, or sixth form contemporaries of his at Dulwich College recalling him setting fire to a school register because there were so many Patels on it and not enough Smiths. Farage, of course, is a foreign name. What is it about the foreign name Farage that makes it profoundly different from the foreign name Patel, I wonder? So I was going to ask you, and forgive me, that today is one of those days where I kind of consider the phone-in element of the programme to be a little bit secondary to getting all of the facts out there, because so much effort is put into distracting you from the reality with ludicrous claims like, oh, well, I have to read out this letter from somebody who you don't know, but he goes to the same school. Or, well, this is ridiculous that we're focusing on this when we should be focusing on that other thing that we never talk about, which is the mess that's going on in Kent County Council. That's my job, I suppose, to make sure you are properly informed before you arrive at any opinions. And it's very hard in the current climate. But I was going to ask you whether or not the current scandals would affect his popularity. But do you know what? I don't want to live in a country where that is a valid question. I still inhabit a country where, of course, it's outrageous. Of course it should affect his popularity. Just because we may have somehow created an ecosystem in which someone who makes jokes about gas chambers can be defended by very prominent media figures doesn't mean that it's a valid response. It's got a touch of the Brexits to it, hasn't it? Well, we need to take both sides of the argument. But what if the other side of the argument is defending jokes about gas chambers or hideous racist abuse? The question of, is it going to change anything, seems to me to almost play into the space that validates the idea that it won't. It's difficult for me, this, because I do want to hear your thoughts on this story, but I don't want you to tell me why you think it won't change anything, because it categorically should. And even by asking that question, I may be overthinking things, in which case you'll no doubt give me a wobble, but even by asking that question, it kind of validates the idea that it's okay if it doesn't change anything. That's not who we are. That's not what it means to be British. That's not what this country represents. A country where we have a balanced argument about whether or not somebody who whispered Hitler was right into the ear of a Jewish schoolboy is behaving in a way, or behaved in a way, that is or is not going to affect his political fortunes. If you're comfortable with this stuff, if you're defending it, if you're pretending that the timescale matters when the apology remains absent, then you're in the wrong. You are hideously in the wrong. All you need to do is imagine that someone you don't like was accused of these things and ask yourself how you'd respond. And if it's not exactly the same, then you're a liar. If it's not exactly the same, then you're lying to yourself. Sometimes it doesn't matter. On the little stuff, I don't know. So a Tory gets accused of fiddling their expenses, a Reform politician gets accused of fiddling their expenses, a Labour politician gets accused of fiddling their expenses, and you can't help, and we can't help, somehow sticking them in a hierarchy of wrongdoing. But if making jokes about gas chambers and telling Jewish schoolboys that Hitler was right isn't something that we can all agree should be an immediate red card from public discourse, we're screwed. We're in really deep trouble. This is why these people have decided to come forward now. So, 0345 6060973. How are you dealing with this story? Okay, that's what I want to know. How are you dealing with this story? How are you dealing with the fact that a man who stands accused now by 24 people of hideous racism, absolutely unconscionable anti-Semitism, obvious lying, that's not an accusation, that's a matter of record, ludicrous obfuscation, desperate attempts to somehow cite a dead comedian as proof that he's done nothing wrong. How are you dealing with this? 0345 6060973. And by all means, I don't know how much or how busy Idiot's Corner will be today, but by all means, send me texts suggesting that I'm paying too much attention to him, because what you're really saying is stop. I hate what I'm seeing in the mirror. I am the person, you're obsessed with him. Why don't you move on? He's leading in the polls. He could become Prime Minister. I'm holding up a mirror, you're looking in it, and you're seeing someone who's comfortable with a man who makes jokes about gas chambers leading our country. I'm holding up a mirror, you're looking in that mirror, and you're seeing somebody who's pretending that it doesn't matter, or who agrees with Nigel Farage that Hitler was right. That's what you're seeing in the mirror. Don't get cross with me for holding up the mirror. If you're not obsessed about this stuff, if you're not profoundly concerned about the idea of somebody possessed of these sort of views and who has indulged in this sort of behaviour, leading one of the most gloriously diverse and multicultural countries in the history of humanity, if you're not obsessed about that possibility, if you're not repelled by it, then you're part of it. You are the latter-day whisperers. You are the people comfortable with jokes about gas chambers. Don't blame me, because what you're seeing in the mirror when I describe to you exactly what is going on here is so hideous and so ugly, so anti-Semitic and so racist, because all you're seeing is you. That's the reflection. But keep the messages coming, seriously. Keep the messages coming, because maybe as you press send and you recognise what you're doing is expressing your revulsion at the reflection that you're seeing in the mirror that I'm holding up, you'll be given a moment of pause and consideration, contemplation and reflection, and you'll realise I'm better than this. How on earth have I ended up making excuses for a man who sidled up to Jewish schoolboys and whispered Hitler was right in their ear. Your thoughts on this story, please. 0345 60 60 973. I can't remember which allegations he's currently denying, and which allegations are banter, and which allegations are absolutely fine because Bernard Manning something, it ain't a half hot mum. But obviously he would no doubt claim that some of the things he stands accused of are not true. Richard Tice yesterday accused Peter Ettedgui of lying. Nigel Farage didn't do that yesterday, but that is how he operates. You know, it goes from not being true to being true but being banter, to being impossible to remember, to being easy to remember, to being something that I can categorically remember but nobody else can remember. So I suppose we need to use the word allegations, but until... God, could you imagine the shame of being the journalist that he sits down with first? Unless it's me. Can you imagine the shame of being the person that he looks at and thinks, yeah, they'll help me get through this. They'll help me get over this hump. They'll help me get through this gas chamber-infused scandal. Good God. Should we take bets on who it will be? Here's someone it definitely won't be. Thomas Watts with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
33 minutes after 10 is the time. It occurs to me you may have missed some of yesterday's press conference, the one that he was compelled to give after his sidekick Richard Tice came perilously close to libelling Peter Ettedgui on the Today programme, the BBC's Today programme yesterday. We may have time later to look at his abuse of the interviewer Emma Barnett, who is, of course, both a woman and Jewish. So somebody that perhaps you should think twice about describing as lower grade, but Nigel Farage didn't. I think he may even abuse her in this clip that you're about to hear. Remember that as of June 2024, Nigel Farage is supposed to be boycotting the BBC, up to and including his season ticket on Question Time and Laura Koonsberg's Sunday morning debacle. But here he is taking a question from Damien Grammaticus about this unfolding hideousness.
This morning, Richard Tice said on the radio, he was asked about the comments made by schoolmates of yours who have said that the comments you made they viewed as racist and offensive. He said that they were lying. You have said before that you did make comments, made them banter, it wasn't correctly racial. So Richard Tice is wrong.
I thought this morning's performance by one of your lower grade presenters on the Today programme was utterly disgraceful. I think to frame a question around the leader of Reform's relationship with Hitler, which is how she framed it, was despicable, disgusting, beyond belief. Are you surprised that 500,000 people every year refuse to pay the licence fee? But let me say this to you. The double standards and hypocrisy of the BBC are absolutely astonishing. At the time I was alleged to have made these remarks, one of your most popular weekly shows was the Black and White Minstrels, right? The BBC were very happy to use blackface. Oh, and not just in the Black and White Minstrels, you did it in It Ain't Half Hot Mum as well. And what about Alf Garnett? Do you remember what he called Marigold? Do you remember the word he used to describe Marigold on live, not live, but on primetime national TV? I better not repeat the word, otherwise you'll all use it and say that I used it. Homophobia? It ain't half hot, mum. Are you being served? Oh, and what about Bernard Manning? Perfectly happy at exactly the same time for Bernard Manning to appear on primetime national BBC comedy, telling jokes for which these days you'd probably get a knock at the door from our thought police and perhaps get a 31-month prison sentence. I cannot put up with the double standards of the BBC about what I'm alleged to have said 49 years ago and what you were putting out on mainstream content. So I want an apology from the BBC for virtually everything you did throughout the 1970s and 80s. And I will respond to your direct question. I've received many letters over the course of the last few days from people that I was at school with. This one I think is particularly relevant. I was a Jewish pupil at Dulwich College at the same time, and I remember him very well. While there was plenty of macho, tongue-in-cheek schoolboy banter, it was humour. And yes, sometimes it was offensive, rather like most of the BBC's output, but never with malice. I never heard him racially abuse anyone. If he had, he would have been reported and punished. He wasn't. The news stories are without evidence except for belatedly politically dubious recollections from nearly half a century ago. Back in the 1970s, the culture was very different. Perhaps Dame News should reflect on that. Especially at Dulwich. Lots of boys said things they'd regret today, or just laugh at. Whilst Nigel stood out, he was neither aggressive nor a racist. If I can help in any way, let me know. And I've had plenty of those messages over the course of the last few days, and I'm sick to death of the double standards and hypocrisy, above all, of your organisation. And what happened on the Today programme this morning was a complete bloody disgrace. Next, Sam Coates from Sky News. No, I'm done with you, thank you.
Well, my question was, he said they were lying.
Sam Coates from Sky. I'm really, until you apologise for all of your output, your appalling output, at the same time that I'm accused of saying these things which I deny, I'm not speaking to you. All right?
Let's start a clock, shall we? Just in the interests of accuracy and truth. It's, 10:39 on Friday, December the 5th. Let's see how long it takes for Nigel Farage to appear on the BBC without having received an apology for them for, not that he sounded hysterical or anything, for all of their output. Again, to clarify, there is no suggestion anywhere that John Inman, Bernard Manning, Windsor Davies or Don Estelle are currently vying to become your Prime Minister. And in fact, Johnny Spate, who wrote the Alf Garnett character, wrote it as a warning against what bigotry and racism could do to a family, or what bigotry and racism would look like. It didn't necessarily land or work as he intended as a comedy, but again, he doesn't seem even to understand the most basic elements of that. And let's have a look at some of the things that that mysterious anonymous correspondent suggested were not offensive or were not hurtful or anything like that. And the list is growing every single day. He had a reputation in school for being a racist. I think he should come clean about his inappropriate behaviour as a young man and apologise. This is the 8th pupil to offer corroboration of Peter Ettedgui's claim. Here are some of the memories. I remember him coming up to us holding the yearbook, which was like a pamphlet, and holding it open and sort of stabbing his finger in the name Patel, I'm adding that, saying, look, the most common name in this school has always been Smith, and now it's Patel, sort of thing, and sort of stabbing his finger at it. The Guardian has obtained a copy of the school roll from 1980, which shows that there were 12 Smiths and 13 Patels. Another former pupil of Asian background added his voice, claiming Farage was an open racist, and would say Enoch Powell was right to him as a form of what he described as racial intimidation. He recalled an assembly shortly before he left Dulwich, so 5 years older than 13. I remember a full upper school assembly in which the headmaster was reading from a list of names of boys whose parents had failed to return some forms. When the name Patel was read out, Farage shouted out aggressively to draw attention to himself. His intervention was loud and disruptive. The headmaster paused and looked up. This happened again, and only with the name Patel. We were sitting in the same row, and I saw him do this. He said this happened when Farage was 18. He said that he appeared to be obsessed with Patels. Again, banter, inoffensive, perfectly normal in the 1970s. Bernard Manning, it ain't half hot mum, something, allo. He would make these gas-hissing noises. He had this fascination with Hitler and the whole kind of Third Reich thing, and he had this fascination with basically gassing Jews. And he, as I say, whenever this lad went into the class, he would make these hissing noises. This is a Jewish contemporary who was not Peter Ettedgui, who's joining us at 11:45. When they were first contacted about these allegations, Mr. Farage denied that he had ever engaged in, condoned, or led racist or anti-Semitic behaviour, which makes it very, very strange that he yesterday spent a long time somewhat hysterically claiming that what he had done was perfectly normal in the context of It Ain't Half Hot Mum, Bernard Manning, and Are You Being Served? What? What do we make of this? When did we become a country in which Holocaust survivors calling upon a public figure to apologise for historical anti-Semitism is a debate to be had? I don't know. But I do know that I'm interested in your reactions to what is currently unfolding in our country. as a consequence of this man being the leading figure in our opinion polls. Andy's in Barnes. Andy, what would you like to say?
Yes, hi, good morning, James. I'm a first-time caller.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I just a little bit of background. I'm 77 years old, and I'm Jewish, and I went to a state school, and I can remember vividly being not only bullied, but being the focus of anti-Semitism. So when Mr. Farage says that he doesn't, it was 50 years ago.
No one could remember that. To be fair, that was last week. This week, everyone can remember. Well, at least he can remember perfectly, but all the people accusing him can't remember anything.
Well, that's the basis of my argument, number one. And number two, somebody said that you can't apologise for something until you admit having done it.
Yeah.
And he hasn't admitted doing it, so how can he apologise? And I think that's his problem. He won't admit that he is, sadly he's a racist.
Why? I mean, he talks about battling extremism without mentioning that his organiser for UKIP in one of his earlier incarnations was a former National Front figure. But the way to deal with this for almost anybody else would be, and neither of us. Well, I was about to say neither of us are psychologists. Andy, you might be.
No,
I don't know.
No,
just checking, just clarifying.
But I'm 77, retired, and I'm not. I'm not a psychologist. But
why wouldn't you just say? When the numbers hit 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 13, 14, 15, 16, 18, 19, 21, 22, 23, 24 contemporaries coming forward to say it's all true.
Amazing. Yeah. I just find it's kind of somewhere between infuriating and annoying.
Yes.
that he just won't put his hands up. He won't take responsibility. And I think a prime thing to be human is that if you do something wrong, you take responsibility. You put your hands up and you say, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And can we move on?" And if we can't move on, then let's find a solution to it.
And here's a question that you're more qualified to answer than I am. Should we move on? I mean, you'd have to somehow have an ability to determine whether or not it was sincere or authentic. And of course, indeed. The longer the delay, the harder it would be to believe him if he ever did say, "I deeply regret what I have done." But should we move on, even if he does apologize? I'm not sure we should, Andy.
No, I don't. I meant move on in terms of trying to repair what he's done, rather than saying I didn't, I never did it, and it's nothing to do with me, and it's the BBC's fault. I love this. I love the fact that he's diverting. He's an artist in diverting attention away from a subject and diverting it to something else.
Well, you can only do it with the collusion of people who are not repelled by what he represents and what he is reported to have said, and that sadly includes the entire editorial floor of the Daily Mail this morning, and even some broadcasters. Do you want to have a crack at explaining what Bernard Manning has to do with him making jokes about gas chambers in the 1970s?
No, I'm not that intelligent.
Not that intelligent. Glorious. Well, and it's dredging up unpleasant memories for you, but
it's awful, yeah.
And that, of course, is part of the problem that we are discussing. I do that thing sometimes about imagining somebody waking up from a coma to find themselves in a country where Holocaust survivors can be calling on a public figure to apologise, and the public figure can be talking about It Ain't Half Hot Mum, a 1970s sitcom, or about Bernard Manning, a profoundly self-professed racist comedian who was absolutely drummed out of the public sphere as a consequence of his bigotries. I don't get it. I don't even understand the point that Nigel Farage was trying to make yesterday. But I suppose it doesn't matter whether he has a point or not. All he needs to know is that his ludicrous posturing and his contortions will be somehow reported on the front page of the Daily Mail and parroted by various people in the broadcast media. That is ugly. That is kind of scary. 10:46 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
10 to 11 is the time. Apart from the teachers at Dulwich College who considered him to be a Hitler Youth supporting fascist, the claim that the allegations have only recently emerged is probably the most egregious lie contained within Farage's response to LBC last week when we presented him with some of these allegations. I can find Michael Crick in 2013 questioning him about some of them, so that's only 12 years ago. Quite how you can say now that my party is leading in the polls. That is why these allegations come out. I mean, it's just a lie, right? And he knows it's a lie, because guess where he was when Michael Crick started asking him questions in the street for Channel 4 News in 2013? Yeah, he was there. He was there. And that bit when he attacked Emma Barnett, the BBC presenter, who is he's always easier, isn't he, attacking women? And it would appear from his school days that he's quite comfortable attacking Jewish people as well, and Emma happens to be both. When he talked about his outrage at being asked about his relationship with Hitler, if I had gone around whispering Hitler was right into people's ears, Jewish people's ears, when I was at school in the 1980s, I would fully expect to be asked to explain what my relationship with Hitler was. Nobody's suggesting that we went out with each other or that we're on the same family tree, as Farage appeared to be bloviating yesterday. The question is, what is your relationship with Hitler, as in with what Hitler is known to have done? For example, if you truly said Hitler was right as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, if you said Hitler was right, what is your relationship exactly with the Holocaust, with the Third Reich, with the Nazis, with Adolf Hitler? But he threw his toys out of the pram about that, which is extraordinary, really, when you think that his own defence, when he's presented with evidence of appalling mistakes and incredibly dangerous and insightful contributions to public discourse, he always claims he was only asking questions. So who's allowed to ask questions in Farage land, and who's not? Alan's in Manchester. Alan, what made you pick up the phone?
Yeah, every year where I live, James, it's a big Jewish area. There's an event put on by the Jewish community called Yom HaShoah. And we went one year, and the theme was, how did Germany change from a sort of very liberal society to electing the Nazis?
Yeah.
And the theme was, it was allowed to, because people didn't challenge, people did nothing. Turn the other cheek. Is it Pastor Niemöller?
Yeah, Martin Niemöller.
Martin, and that's,
So for people who don't know, it's a very well known but not necessarily universally known poem, by a pastor, by a priest, that essentially pointed out that first they came for one group of people, whether it's trades unionists or journalists or homosexuals or Jews or Roma. First they came for them, and I did not do anything because I wasn't one of them. And then he goes through a long list of people targeted by the Nazis and ends by saying, and then they came for me, and there wasn't anybody left to do anything in my case.
Yeah, and so I'm glad now that Farage is coming under the microscope, because as you say, James, this man wants to be the Prime Minister of this country, and it's right he should be scrutinised, and he should have been scrutinised a long time ago instead of being treated like a celebrity figure, having more appearances on Question Time, even though he had virtually no representation in Parliament. So, if he's going to throw his toys out the pram, good. But the thing is, where is the serious journalism on this sometimes, James? Where's the Dispatches programmes? Where's the Panorama?
Well, Michael Crick has done good work on this. Modesty prevents me from pointing out who has arguably done the most work in this field. The newsagents are pretty clear-eyed on what has been going on here. People at The Guardian, James Bloodworth, I think, but certainly Henry Dyer and Daniel Boffey. But one of the strangest things...
He gets a free pass in a lot of the right-wing press, though. He gets
a free pass on the BBC, which is extraordinary, but possibly linked to some of the reasons that we were examining during the last scandal that the BBC was exposed to by the Daily Telegraph. I don't know. Yeah. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
Why do you think he didn't apologise? Why didn't he just apologise? Because, the initial denial was never going to hold water, but he obviously thought it might get him through a news cycle or two. And then the claim that nobody could remember was never going to hold water, because anybody who's been the victim of almost any form of bullying, let alone gas chamber-related anti-Semitic bullying, is going to know that you never forget those things. Some of the letters to the newspapers in the immediate aftermath from people who had been victims of racist and anti-Semitic bullying in their school days were heartbreaking. The clarity in some cases made it sound as if it had happened yesterday. So that was never going to work. This pathetic letter that he cited from somebody you don't know but who went to the same school, which just seems to posit the notion that if somebody somewhere didn't see something, then that something never could have happened. I mean, truly breathtaking that anybody would cite that as pertinent or relevant to this scandal, to this unfolding scandal. But and then of course he's reduced to saying essentially, yeah, all right, so what? Bernard Manning did it too, which is a very odd defence, but that's where he got to yesterday. At which point, why doesn't he just say, and obviously I'm very sorry for being a sort of public school goose-stepping Bernard Manning in the 1970s?
Well, you know what, James?
Yeah.
Maybe he's not all that bright. Like his friends at Kent County Council or his friends at Lancashire County Council are making a right mess of wherever. Maybe it's not that clever, and it's only right.
Yeah, but he's sly. He's very, very good at wriggling. Normally, he's very good at this stuff, and I don't want to overthink it, but there's probably an answer to that question that he has come up with. Why don't you just apologise? Is he worried, for example, about alienating some of his core support if he apologises for behaviour that they might be applauding privately, publicly, and if you go on social media?
Well, he should apologise. I have Jewish friends, and one of my friends, his parents were the Windermere boys. And I've seen people, God rest his soul, little Jack Eisenberg, who used to go around Manchester talking about the Holocaust and how he lost his entire family. And how he said goodbye to his brother at 14, and how he survived numerous, not concentration camps, but labour camps. That it's heartbreaking to hear that, James. He came over and he set up in Manchester, and he created a new life in Manchester, as a lot of the Windermere boys did.
Of course, same generation, I suppose, of Mancunian as Bernard Manning. But odd that Nigel Farage should choose to mention one yesterday and sort of denigrate the memory of the other. I wonder if you asked him, I'm trying to think what question he should be asked in the event of him actually being exposed to anything close to robust scrutiny. When did you realise Hitler was wrong? Might be a good one.
Yeah.
Do you think? I don't know.
It's only right, James. He comes under scrutiny, and a lot more of it, and his mate Tice.
Yeah, well, Tice, of course, accused Peter Ettedgui and everybody else who has corroborated his account of events of being a liar yesterday on the BBC. I think that's why Farage had to come out of hiding and call a press conference, although wasn't it interesting that it was nowhere near as slick as all the other press conferences he calls. And still, I don't know if I should tell you this, but even some LBC programmes where he regularly gets a very warm welcome, didn't get their calls returned when they were trying to have an interview with him today. So when I say he's gone into hiding, I am not exaggerating. That, of course, will just be a temporary holding practice, because he threatened to boycott the BBC in June of 2024 if they didn't apologise. They didn't apologise. And he threatened to boycott them again yesterday unless they apologise. They won't apologise. So are we never going to see him on Question Time or indeed Laura Koonsberg's Sunday morning entertainment again? Or is he lying again? That is a rhetorical question. Although, wouldn't it be fascinating if it wasn't? What if he did actually? I suppose you could describe it as defecating in his own trumpet, if he were to actually boycott the BBC. I saw that phrase, that rather felicitous phrase, on Blue Sky earlier this morning. Forgive me if it offends your sensibilities. Staying with this, inevitably, joined at 11:45 by Peter Ettedgui, who started this particular ball rolling. But as I mentioned a moment ago, the allegations are decades old, despite Nigel Farage lying about them being recent and Richard Tice lying about them being inventions. But, of course, that question I just asked Alan is one you might like to answer. Why won't he just apologise? Now that he's essentially admitted that he did it, or a lot of it, instead of shouting Bernard Manning at people like a sort of Friday night drunk in the middle of Oxford Street, why won't he just admit it? Why won't he just say sorry? 0345 6060 973.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Why won't he apologise? So, first of all, you deny it. Then you pretend it wasn't a big deal after all. No, hang on. First of all, you deny it. Then you claim no one can remember. Then you pretend it wasn't a very big deal after all. Then you start shouting like a drunk on a Friday night on Oxford Street about Bernard Manning and it ain't half hot, Mum. But never do you actually apologise, even when you have come as close as it's possible to come to admitting that it's all true. Why won't he apologise? I genuinely want you to answer that question. It sounds like I'm just burbling or pontificating. I'm not. Why won't he apologise? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Why won't he apologise? Instead of pretending it's not a big deal, I mean, do you think that I mean, listen, you can tell what the BBC thinks about the list of programmes that he decided to start coughing about yesterday, because they don't show them anymore. So, you know, and indeed some programmes, when they have a trigger warning on them because they contain themes or language that is not acceptable in the modern world, people like Farage have a fit of the vapours, don't they, and complain about it. I mean, he's so extraordinarily dishonest. It's breathtaking. But why won't he apologise? In your opinion, why won't he apologise? Why won't he apologise for doing something that he's now pretending wasn't a very big deal after all, when everybody knows that it is, up to and including and I can't believe I have to say this, the Holocaust survivors calling for an apology? 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Stuart's in Walton in Liverpool. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. Good morning. Good morning to all your listeners.
How polite of you. Carry on.
Thank you very much. I would ask him one question. Are you anti-Semitic? That's it. And if you can wriggle out of that one, he's doing very well. As you quite rightly pointed out, the BBC don't show those shows because they were shown in the 1970s. It seems to me that Mr. Farage is stuck in the 1970s and he doesn't want to come out.
But he's not exactly overburdened with honesty or integrity, so he could apologise and not mean it, which might get him out of a hole. I'm fascinated by the fact that he won't even do that.
Exactly. So that says to me he's anti-Semitic, or he borders on it. Because how this is the other thing that annoys me with him. He says there's levels of this. Well, hang on. If you're going up to somebody Jewish and insulting them, is there a scale? 10 to 1? What is it? It's not.
I mean, even if there is, Hitler was right, and suggesting that teenage boys should have been in the Nazi gas chambers is going to be a 10, I think, on anything that is verbal.
So one of the journalists, I mean, I said to your researcher, if he's ever brave enough to come and be examined by you, which he won't, and I commend your work on this.
Thank you.
It is excellent work.
Someone's got to
usual.
do it, mate. And I mean, it shouldn't be.
It's you.
It shouldn't be a lonely. It's not just me. I mean, the Guardian have led the line on these latest allegations. Michael Crick has done some good work over the years, I mean, you're perfectly entitled to wonder why other people are less repulsed by what is in plain sight and always has been, and I don't know the answer to that.
Well, when you were doing this, I think it was yesterday, and a couple of people contacted you and said, "So what?"
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you why. So what? Because this man could be our next Prime Minister.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's set to be, according to the latest polling, and that's something that you're either comfortable with or uncomfortable with. And if you're comfortable with it, you're comfortable with all of the things that are being talked about this week.
Exactly, and he's denying it, as you say. More. How come one person writes a letter, which we have not seen, by the way?
Allegedly wrote a letter.
Exactly.
Because, you know.
Right. But 20, 30 other people, he dismisses them, but this guy's a good guy.
The guy we can't name,
exactly,
and who wasn't there, is the one we should all trust, as opposed to the people we can name who were there.
Exactly.
And that, I mean, how do you even report that? It's a little bit Trumpy, isn't it? Is that the media, even the good bits of it, don't really have the vocabulary to process this level of dishonesty or disingenuousness or whatever you want to call it. I mean, there it is in a nutshell. Stuart's just cracked it. So here is what you should do. You should trust this guy who we are not going to name and who wasn't there when these things allegedly happened. You should trust him. You should not trust the 24 and counting people who we can mostly name. Some people still are not comfortable having their names in the public sphere. It's not hard to understand why, is it? With immigration judges being forced to flee their homes after honest Bob Jenrick launched a campaign against them. But people who we can name and who were there cannot be trusted, says Nigel Farage. But one man who may or may not exist, we cannot name and definitely wasn't there, is someone whose account we can trust. Just actually, crikey, thank you, Stuart. Let's just pause for a moment to reflect upon that. And of course, the utter absurdity of citing that letter as a counterbalance to what is being said by people whose names we do know and who were present at the time of the alleged behaviour. So here is someone who wasn't there, who we don't even know exists. But I think I have to mention this letter from someone who may not exist and definitely wasn't there, because that is a very important part of balance when discussing all of these people who we can name and who were there. How mad is that? Seriously. Even by the standards of Boris Johnson's brilliant, Brexit's going to make us all rich, Liz Truss is a genius. How mad is that? Here's a letter from someone who may not exist, who wasn't there when this stuff happened. But we need to remember that letter when we're talking about all of the people who were there and who are named. Riddle me that. 0345 606 0973. Thank you, Stuart. Duncan is in Manchester. Duncan, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
It goes without saying the man's a disgrace. We've known that for quite some time. What I would like to touch on, apart from what he said, I do think we can draw a crumb of comfort from this. I think he's peaked too early. I think people are going to see through. There'll be more instances like this, of not just him, but the people who are underneath him on these various councils up and down the country. Yesterday, it was ridiculous. It was like listening to a baby Trump.
Yes.
I mean, he said, the BBC reporter, broadcaster, who's low grade, by the way.
Yeah, that was right.
It was like listening to Donald Trump. And then the next thing, his deputy is on the telephone. I think you alluded earlier. Stopped just short of libeling.
I don't know that he did. I mean, neither of us. Well, I say that. I didn't know whether Andy was a psychologist or not. I don't know whether or not you're a libel lawyer. But I would have thought calling someone a liar, if they haven't lied, is libel.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll meet him. We'll meet Peter in half an hour.
I was speaking to somebody last night, and as much we all accept that part of being a politician is a little bit slippery. They don't like being penned down, and they don't like answering questions. But traditionally in this country, when politicians have gone down the road of blatant lying, especially in crossing the boundaries of what's legal and what's not, they've gone to prison for it. Jeffrey Archer, Jonathan Aitken are two examples that spring to mind in fairly recent times. And yet we're accepting it. It's like what's happening in the States. We're starting to accept this kind of thing.
I mean, he hasn't. I know your point is more kind of tonal than substantive, but he hasn't lied in a witness box in a court of law like Archer and Aitken did.
Of course he's not.
He's lied almost everywhere else, of course, but not in a witness box, as far as we're aware, in a court of law.
And I've got to choose, and obviously I'm trying to choose my words carefully. In my opinion, it's only a matter of time before one of them does. I mean, there's one of them serving, from the UKIP, I think, but the other one's serving 10 years from the other day. It's only
you mean the protégé, close friend and party leader in Wales of Farage's outfit that has been jailed for taking bribes from a Kremlin stooge, for saying things that I can't find any real clear blue water between things that the bloke who was bribed said and things that the bloke who wasn't bribed said. But that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, the man he hardly knows.
The man he hardly knows.
And then the other, another thing that what was my original point was, I think he would have got more. It would have been better for him had he just apologised and accepted that, because I think there's a certain demographic of age group, and I'm 55, people around my age and perhaps a little bit older, who would have accepted his apology and said, "Oh, well, that's how it was in them days."
Yeah,
I don't think that's right.
And nor do I.
I don't think that's right. But I think there's a lot of people would have accepted it.
Well, he gives them a fig leaf.
He could have moved on.
He gives them a fig leaf to hide their own shame about not being repelled by it, not being disgusted by it. And it's a much bigger fig leaf for them to be able to say, well, he's apologised, you have to move on, instead of giving them the fig leaf that says, Bernard Manning and it ain't half hot, mum, you have to move on. It's like there's a big fig leaf and a little fig leaf here, and he's only given his supporters the pathetic little fig leaf.
Well, I mean, the man is divisive. He causes hate. There was something that I think I disagree with you slightly on, James. I think his core support is not necessarily the people who are dying in the war racist. They're never going to change their minds. You know, they're people who have their opinions. I think it's people who have taken what he said on face value and don't push back with one or two questions.
Maybe.
And that's what you're fantastic at doing. People come on, we hear them daily. They come on with an half-baked theory and they've seen it on Facebook, somebody down the pub's told them, and they'll go off on a rant. And it's dismantled with one or two sensible questions. And,
maybe you're right, actually. So the kind of people who've migrated from the BNP or the National Front into Farage's ranks are not the core support. If he wants to become Prime Minister, he needs respectable people to believe that he's none of the things these allegations portray him as.
Absolutely. And I know people, I do know people, and I've had conversations with them in the last few weeks where it ends up in a, good-hearted but an argument, and I'll put points across, and they can have an answer. I believe there's lots of people, especially of a certain age, like sort of 40s and upwards, who accept what he's saying. He's not a racist. Something's got to be done, and he's this and he's that, and it's only when you can demonstrate something and break it down for them. Some of them won't accept it. But
that's it, isn't it? That's the killer question, is that the people who say, all right, then he is a racist, how many of them are going to be then still on board?
Yeah, well,
that's the question.
The ones that are racist, they're not going to change. But I think, I believe his core support are people who've not.
I think you're right. I think you might be right. And that, of course, is also an answer to the question of why he won't apologise, because he has to have that space. He absolutely needs the space where people can believe. I'm not even going to say pretend, that people can believe he's none of the things that. I mean, forgive the self-reference, but he's none of the things that I know him to be. There's none of the things he has been proven to be, if you've been paying attention and you care enough. But everyone's busy. So he needs a space in which people can tell themselves that he's not the bloke who set fire to the school register because it had the name Patel on it more frequently than the name Smith. He's not the bloke who said they shouldn't bother putting up ethnic minority candidates because they were never going to win the N-word vote. He's not the bloke that sidled up to Jewish boys at his school and whispered Hitler was right or made the sound effects of the gas chamber. He can't be that bloke and the bloke that you're going to vote for because you've had enough of the other lot. He can't be that person and the person that somehow represents your carefully cultivated misgivings about immigration, even as the numbers plummet. He can't be both. He can't harvest the vote of respectable people and be the person portrayed by his contemporaries, by a growing number of his contemporaries. That's it, is it? Is that why he can't apologise? Because it would rip off the fig leaf that some of his supporters can preserve their modesty with. That you can cling to the ludicrous notion that he's none of the things that he obviously is. But there comes a point where you can't cling to it anymore. The other thought that occurred to me listening to Duncan was that he's not as good as Trump at this stuff. This is funny, really. We don't have a very strong tradition of populism in this country. We've had it from the left and from the right in recent years. But he's not as good at it, is he? I don't know why that is. I think, is it because Trump doesn't care about anything? Whereas Farage clearly has incredibly thin... No, Trump has incredibly thin skin. Just thinking about the thing Simon was talking to us about yesterday when Mamdani was preparing to call him a fascist and Trump sort of said, yeah, that's fine, you can call me a fascist. There's a difference between them there, isn't there? Different kind of... I don't know what it is. A different relationship with racism, a different relationship with World War II, a different relationship with reality. But Trump doesn't seem to care about this stuff. And yet there are other times when he's up in the middle of the night posting on his own social media platform when he seems to care about it to an almost psychopathic degree. But either way, Farage isn't as good as Trump at dismissing these allegations. Maybe the British population has a different relationship with World War II from the Americans. I don't know. I'm thinking about the way that Trump treated Zelensky, and the idea of a UK Prime Minister doing that is still, I think, anathema, although not that long ago, I'd have said that a very prominent UK politician being called upon to apologise by a group of Holocaust survivors, I'd have said that was probably a point on which everybody would be in unanimous agreement, but shows what I know.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 20 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I kind of find myself wondering more about the apology now than almost anything else. I am supremely unsurprised by the allegations being levelled at Nigel Farage, many of which he seems to acknowledge are true, although in typical Nigel Farage fashion, it's hard to know where the reality ends and fantasy begins. But why would you not apologise? If someone had accused you, if Holocaust survivors were asking you to apologise for events now corroborated by many, many schoolmates, and the only person he's offered up in his defence is somebody who wasn't there when this stuff happened. I can't get past that either, actually. But why would he not apologise? The question I began asking you this morning was how are you dealing with all this stuff? What is it doing to you, either personally or politically? And the number you always need to contact this programme is 0345 6060 973. I just want to do a little bit more from the archive because it's important to reflect on the supposed defence or response of him and his colleagues. That perhaps the most egregious and obviously dishonest claim is this one. It is only now that my party is leading in the polls that these allegations are coming out. So Nigel Farage claiming that it is only now that the party is leading in the polls that these allegations are coming out. He then says, I will leave the public to draw their own conclusions about why that might be. Oddly, he doesn't say, I'm lying through my teeth because these kind of allegations have been made about me since, well, literally when I was at school and a teacher wrote to the headmaster complaining about plans to make me a prefect because I had, quotes, publicly professed racist and neo-fascist views. So it is simultaneously an allegation that is only coming out now, but that was made by a teacher at his actual school in 1981. So if it's 2025 now and it's 1981 then, I wonder where 2013 fits into that category, because here he is being questioned by Michael Crick, working at the time for Channel 4 News, about allegations which he claims currently have only just emerged 12 years later because he's leading in the polls.
Mr. Farage, would you like to see the letter?
I've seen it before.
Have you?
Well, not for 30 years. Yes, of course, I said some ridiculous things that upset
Racist
them.
things?
Not necessarily racist things.
Not
but
necessarily racist?
Well, it depends how you define it. You see, I mean, you've got to remember that ever since 1968, up until the last couple of years, we've not been able in this country intelligently to discuss immigration, to discuss integration. It's all been a buried subject, and that's happened through academia, it's happened through politics and the media.
But, I mean, that letter... For instance, it cites an example of you taunting someone in class and having to be excluded.
I was excluded
by implication on racial grounds.
I was excluded from class dozens of times over the years for all sorts of
comments?
reasons. No. I don't accept that. You know,
I mean, it's not just that.
I was excluded from class.
Fellow pupils remember you making racist comments.
Well, I might have wound some of them up too, but all through.
So you made racist comments to wind people up.
All through the 1970s and 80s, I would counter any received wisdom on any subject quite deliberately. I wasn't alone in doing that. It was a very political school. We had people who were members of very left-wing organisations. We also had boys at school who were members of hard-right organisations.
What about the accusation that you marched through this Sussex village singing Hitler Youth songs?
I don't even know the words. I mean, none of this...
Maybe you did in those days.
None of this loses anything in my telling, does it? And you know, the truth of it is...
Well, how would a story like that emerge?
There was a small group of people there, in my teaching staff, who wanted to abolish the CCF. They even wanted to abolish wearing poppies and Remembrance Day parade. Can you imagine people being that extreme?
But those left-wing English staff wouldn't have been on the CCF.
Exactly.
So how would they know? How would they know if it wasn't somebody who was there?
Well, as I say, none of this loses anything in my telling. People often believe what they want to believe. That is complete baloney. Was I a typical bullshit teenager who pushed the boundaries of debate further than perhaps I ought to have done? Yes. Have I, to some extent, in politics, continued to challenge things that are continued to be unchallengeable? Yes. Have I ever been a member of any extremist organisation, left or right? No.
don't you worry that things like this and the comments by your colleague and friend Godfrey Bloom about Bongo Land make UKIP look like a racist party, or an inherently racist party?
No, because it isn't, and everyone knows that.
That doesn't worry you?
It would worry me if there was a scintilla of truth in it, and it would worry me if people out there genuinely thought it, but they don't. And I know that it's a big job of the political and media class to try and make the country think that somehow, because UKIP is daring to take on tough issues, that it's a racist party, but it is not. And that's evidenced by the kind of people that stand for us and now vote for us.
He's so boring, isn't he? You forget that, actually. The same lines, the same nonsenses, claiming then that you are actually now allowed to talk about immigration, claiming in his response to these allegations that you're not still. It's impossible. I guess that's the thing. If you honestly can't tell the truth about anything, it's very hard to keep track of people. You've got another parallel with Trump there. I don't know what's better. Is that approach to trying to gish gallop, to try and sort of talk over Michael Crick, ignore these recollections? Another former school friend has said, I was in the CCF with him from 1979 to 1982 or so. He did teach the younger members of the CCF the infamous Gas 'Em All song, or at least he led the singing of it on CCF coaches to training areas. He said there were black, Asian and Jewish CCF cadets on the bus, and as I say, one of them asked me not to sing it or to make those sorts of comments, and I didn't. I can't really tell you the words of this without using words that Ofcom has problems with, but here it is, to the tune of George Formby's Bless 'Em All. Gas 'em all, gas 'em all, gas 'em all, and into the showers they crawl. We'll gas all the N-words, we'll gas all the Jews. Come on, you lads, gas 'em all. And again, people who have put their names to their recollections sharing these stories, and somebody who wasn't there and hasn't put their name to their recollections, being cited by Nigel Farage in his own defence, and sadly by people in the media who seem to be unperturbed by these allegations, unbothered by them, also pretending that letter has some sort of role of balance or defence. There it is, and that's in 2013. So the letter was in 1981. It was brought to his attention in 2013, but the allegations were invented last week, according to Farage, because his party is leading in the opinion polls. 11:27 is the time. Phil is in Woking. Phil, what's going on?
That was tricky to try and hold on to the thought and reason as to why I was calling you, James.
Yes.
But basically, when I first turned the radio on, I heard you say, "Why can't he apologise? Why can't he just apologise?"
Yeah.
I had no idea at that moment who you were talking about.
Right.
But in my head, I immediately went, it's got to be Farage or possibly Trump.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then obviously, as you went forward, you obviously mentioned about the Nigel Farage, and then you likened him to Trump. And interestingly, I watched a programme the other day, randomly, don't know why, I need to get a life really, but The Apprentice on Netflix regards the Trump, the early days.
Right.
And it was the Roy Cohen sort of training almost, where he said Trump's success, attack, admit nothing, deny everything, and finally never admit defeat. And I think he is literally following that sort of that advice. He's just literally saying to himself, as long as I don't admit it, attack, keep going. I think that's the mentality. The question originally was, why can't he apologise?
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason. I think he just, it's not maybe that he physically can't, but he won't in this scenario, because he wants everyone to just,
What? I mean, because you can say he can't, but that's not an answer to why he won't. I mean, it is an answer to why he won't, but it kind of frees us up.
That's why he won't. He won't apologise, because he's following that train of thought, that mentality. Look, he watched his pal over the...
Right, it's what Roy Cohen told Trump back in the day, as Andy reminds me, never apologise for anything. But he and then he does that horrible apology that we've all told our children doesn't count as a proper apology. It was, if I offended anyone, then obviously I'm sorry, but I didn't believe that I offended anyone, or I wasn't offensive when I sidled up to Jewish boys and made gas chamber sound effects in their ears, according to their memory. Yeah, it is. If you apologise, so these are people. So David Lammy has apologised for repeating the claims about the Hitler Youth songs, which were made by a teacher at his actual school in 1981. And maybe in Farage's world, that makes David Lammy a mug. It makes him a fool for apologising. I mean, it hasn't been proved that it's not true, but for some reason, David Lammy decided to apologise for that. Maybe they are of the view that never explain, never apologise is the mark of a man. In my experience, it's the mark of an inveterate liar. Thank you, Phil. Again, you know, and Idiot's Corner a little bit quiet today, but not, I don't think, silent. The suggestion, I guess nobody really, maybe this is an unintentional answer to the question. So you can, you know, get cross with me about reporting on this stuff and pretend that you think it's indicative of something other than the awfulness of Nigel Farage. But you can't come out and say, I agree with him. Nobody, isn't that fascinating? Friend or foe of Farage, nobody finds it either hard to believe that this stuff is true or is arguing that he's really changed. And that, I don't know whether that answers the question of why he won't apologise or whether it makes the question more acute. Nobody finds this stuff hard to believe. I mean, how could you? And nobody is arguing that he's changed. You can argue that it doesn't matter because it was years ago at school, but I mean, anybody who cares about things like the Holocaust would struggle to accept your argument that this kind of language doesn't matter. Nobody thinks he's changed, including people who are defending him. Maybe that's why he can't apologise, because he doesn't want to throw them under a kind of rhetorical bus. What do you do if you're a massive Nigel Farage fan, you're comfortable with all of these allegations, and then he apologises for them? He's telling you to be ashamed of your support for him. Yes, I don't know. It doesn't work like that, does it? Do people think that deeply about this stuff? I don't know. Maybe it's just pathological. I can't apologise. I am incapable of apologising. Thomas Watts, how's your headline?
James O'Brien on LBC.
11:34 is the time. It's you know, it's a funny one, isn't it? Funny peculiar, not funny ha-ha, lest there be any doubt whatsoever. But the story it tells about our country, the idea that our news bulletin can currently be led by the words Holocaust survivors, are calling on a public figure to apologise, and he won't. He hasn't. He can't. I don't know. I will introduce you in about 10 minutes to the gentleman who was, among other Jewish peoples at Dulwich College, was on the receiving end of the behaviour that we are talking about. And again, I have to say, Farage, I think, still denies some of it while claiming that some of it happened but somehow wasn't offensive. I'd be fascinated to know what inoffensive racism or inoffensive anti-Semitism sounds like. But again, it's not going to be me that gets the chance to ask him. But there it is. And this notion that somehow there's a balance here, that's what I'm really zoning in on this morning, is the idea that it just becomes like everything else. It becomes a story with two sides. I'm sure that 10 years ago, Holocaust survivors calling for ... would have just been pretty close to a slam dunk. No one's going to challenge that. No one's going to push back against that. No one's going to resist it. I remember Suella Braverman at a constituency meeting being asked by another Holocaust survivor to just moderate the language she used about refugees, because the Holocaust survivor said, I was a refugee once. And Braverman refused. That felt like a moment, didn't it? It really felt like, well, it did to me at least. I think I went on about it at the time in ways that you may have found confusing, but it seemed to me to speak to a national decline. It's to speak to a social reversal of standards and values upon which, if we didn't all agree, we certainly would not publicly dissent from. That's an interesting point, isn't it? Because how much of... When Ettedgui threw Enoch Powell out of the Tory party after his Rivers of Blood speech, at roughly the same time that Nigel Farage was polishing his portrait of Enoch Powell every night, when he'd got home from a hard day's anti-Semitism at school... Heath was being courageous. The public opinion was nowhere near where it was 20 or 30 years later. Some of the letters that are in an archive I found when I was researching I didn't find it. I consulted when I was researching my last book, were extraordinary. I think Powell kept them all. But it was an act of proper courage. It was Ted Heath essentially painting a picture of a country that he wanted to lead, as opposed to necessarily the country that he was leading, and just accepting a value, a standard, that racism was not acceptable, even if lots of people thought that it were. And I think you saw something similar with Suella Braverman and the Holocaust survivor. Something broke that day. It somehow became public what would once have been kept private. You know, the essential subtext of that moment was, I don't care about the feelings of Holocaust survivors. I'm going to carry on demonising refugees in exactly the way that this woman feels she and her forebears were demonised in 1930s Germany. That's an incredible moment in politics. And again, our newspapers were on the other side of where decency would be in that kind of argument. And with Farage, with these comments now, the refusal, the failure to apologise, the dancing on the head of a pin about what did and what did not happen, what was and was not offensive. But it creates a kind of dichotomy that I find repellent. It creates this space. I so nearly came on air and talked and asked you, because I've got to ask you a question. Well, I don't really have to. There are days when I could comfortably talk for the whole 3 hours, as you well know. But I want to hear from you on days like today. But I don't want you to tell me why it doesn't matter or whether or not it matters. Of course it matters. It has to matter. Even if 99% of people say it doesn't matter, it still has to matter, doesn't it? It has to matter. If 99% of people say that the earth is flat, but it's not, it has to matter that the earth is round. It has to matter. And it's not democratic. This is the point I'm making about Ted Heath. Sometimes what matters is more important and more profound than a show of hands. And this is, for me, one of those moments. It has to matter. Oh, it doesn't really matter. It ain't half hot, Mum Bernard Manning 50 years ago. It has to matter. And listen, if the bloke is, I don't know, driving a minicab or working as a chiropodist, then it doesn't matter as much. But if he's going to be Prime Minister, if he wants to be Prime Minister, if he's in with a chance of being Prime Minister, then it has to matter. It just has to matter. That, I think, and I don't want to put words into his mouth because he's joining me in 5 minutes, that is why Peter Ettedgui has decided, after some time of sharing these stories privately, he's decided to put his name to his memories today. Because if it doesn't matter now, when does it matter? So, by all means, and in fact, today's inbox has been surprisingly, well, not surprisingly, because we are decent people, but there haven't been many applications for Idiot's Corner today, except from people who are either supremely comfortable with the anti-Semitism or disgusted by the reflection they've seen in the mirror that I've held up today. But that idea that it you know, there's an argument or a debate to be had, or should we be covering this, or should we be covering county council? And a question asked by people who want to cover neither. It's extraordinarily disingenuous, but it just has to matter. Sometimes it really has to matter. I'd have put the Breaking Point poster on that list. Moments where we lost something precious, something valuable. The Breaking Point poster, unveiled on the morning that Joe Cox was assassinated by a white supremacist terrorist. It gave no pause whatsoever to the people who unveiled that poster. Suella Braverman being asked by a Holocaust survivor to moderate the language she used about refugees and refusing. Those moments where we've lost something really valuable. This could be another one. Maybe it already is. Maybe it's too late. But my God, we should at least go down fighting, shouldn't we? It has to matter. There was truth and there was untruth. And if you clung on to truth, even against the whole world, you would not go mad. And I'm one of those people who quotes George Orwell, who's actually read George Orwell, unlike most of your mates on Twitter. Andrew's in Penzance. Andrew, what would you like to say?
James, good morning.
Hello.
I'd like to have a stab at why he won't apologise. But before I do, can I thank and congratulate you and your team on this stunning piece of journalism?
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I think there are two reasons which are connected. The first one is that Farage is desperate to shed the far-right image of reform, a challenge that his members make almost impossible on a daily basis. But the other part of it, as I say, which is connected to that, is that all of his right-wing support and many of the members of the Tory party who he might hope will defect to him have all gone hard on any scintilla of anti-Semitism that they can come across, if it's in peace marches or if it's in Bob Villain or if it's in Kneecap or it's in a football match, and they've all gone totally silent. And if Farage apologises, he's admitting that he was a vicious anti-Semite, and when they try to defect his party, they're going to face a lot of clips talking about how much they're against anti-Semitism.
I mean, it's a terrible thing to say, but the right-wing repenter in this country gets a much, much easier ride than the left-wing repenter, simply by the nature of the biggest platforms and the loudest voices in our media. So if he apologised and said, I completely disavow what I did, I even apologise for trying to pass it all off as banter, then doesn't he provide wriggle room for the people you're positing, for the potential defectors that you're
I don't think so, and here's why. Well, if he effectively admits to what he said, which I think by implication he did yesterday, when he used the fiction that two wrongs make a right. But if he admits to it formally, then all of the stuff that you've mentioned from Alan Sked suddenly gets a greater degree of legitimacy.
Yeah.
And a lot of your listeners will remember that shortly after he lost his slot on LBC, he was caught using the racist slur for Chinese people, the one that rhymes with slinky. And he tried to pass that off as banter. So if he admits to this one, then suddenly all of those become a lot more credible, and his efforts to say this is ancient history fall apart.
That's what it all boils down to, really. It's not even whether or not people believe that he's changed. It's whether or not some of the people minded to vote for him can continue to convince or can continue to cling to the idea that either he has changed or that he was never like this in the first place.
Yeah, and I think admitting to that, and then all of the other stuff that's coming out will make that claim impossible, and it will lose him enough support to stop him getting into Downing Street.
Indeed, and that obviously is what he's worried about, and whether or not he should be, and the fact that it's even questionable is what weighs very heavy on my heart today. I remember him defending the use of the word that you have just alluded to. I don't personally remember him actually using it himself. Just to clarify that point. Although, it's like night following day, isn't it? There's a member of his current outfit who is in hot water for using exactly the same slur 11 years after he defended a member of one of his previous outfits. For using the word that you described. 11:45 is the time. I'll be joined next by Peter Ettedgui, whose decision to come forward and shrug off the cloak of anonymity with regard to his recollections of the school days he shared with Nigel Farage has prompted this latest, we call it a resurrection, probably, of remembrance. But I'm interested in how he's coping with the unwanted attention that he felt he had little choice but to draw down upon himself, and of course with how the story is unfolding and how the denials or the obfuscations or the sort of hokey-cokey of denial and undenial and memory and recollection and forgetfulness and offence and inoffence is landing with him, and I'll introduce you to Peter after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:49 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. At about this point in yesterday's programme, I think I said to you that I was 99% certain that I had met Peter Ettedgui on the 4th of March 2019. I had to triple check the dates, and that he had shared with me at that gathering exactly the same memories that he has publicly shared in the last week. But it was 99%. I'm somewhat relieved to tell you that having just said hello to Peter in the studio, it is now 100%. We did meet in March 2019.
We were both participating in an event. You just published your book.
That's right.
I just made a film, and we were introduced, and somehow, I don't quite know how, we got onto the subject of Brexit and Nigel Farage, and I told you my recollections of Farage at school.
Of all the things that you have now recollected rather more publicly, the gas chamber sound effects, the Hitler was right comments, and all the rest of it. It's extremely well documented. And I suppose the first question I have to ask you, Peter, is why have you decided to come forward in your own name?
Well, I had come forward in my own name before. When Michael Crick did his original report, I declined any involvement with that because I just kind of thought at that time, this is 2013, I kind of thought, well, I mean, you know, it was awful, but it's years later, and I didn't feel I could put my head above the parapet. I didn't think anyone would corroborate what had happened to me. So, you know, I kind of like backed away from that. But then Michael came back to me when he was writing his biography of Farage.
Oh, yes, of course.
During COVID, and we had a long conversation about Farage, and he quoted me both on and off the record. I still didn't feel in any way comfortable about owning in my name the worst of the comments. And what struck me both after the 2013 report and around the time of the biography was the way that Farage would sort of shrug it off as banter, which is, of course, the last refuge of anybody. And you know, he has this sort of stock in trade of the cheeky chappy, and I'm just a bit of a disruptor and a wind-up, a merchant and all of that, and don't believe anything. But of course, you know, those of us who suffered his verbal abuse at school, and that, by the way, is not just anti-Semitic verbal abuse, but just to sort of like really nail this. It was towards Asian kids, Black British kids, you know, and anyone who wasn't white, really, and anyone who was Jewish, obviously. And I felt so embittered, enraged by the denials, the repeated denials, that I didn't hesitate when The Guardian got in touch with me, because, you know, this is not about me necessarily coming forward and saying, I want to tell my story. This is about the Guardian's initial, incredibly well-researched article, and balanced article as well. I mean, they took the trouble to quote people who don't remember Farage being abusive, and representing him in all his colours. You know, he could be very charming, as you probably know. He can be, you can share a laugh with the guy. But yeah, I just really didn't hesitate at that point, because I thought that the motive that The Guardian were doing, which was to say, look, is this person who said these things and then denied them a fit person to be our Prime Minister? I think that's a very good question, and so that's why I didn't hesitate to get involved. Sorry, very long answer to your question.
Take it all the time you want, Peter. I always do. But I
noticed.
So the complexion of the country has changed since you spoke to me in 2019, and the prospect of him becoming Prime Minister has changed the context of the experience, the whole encounter, the whole history of interactions. Do you have any regrets given the response that has unfolded? I mean, just in the last week, do you ever think, why have I done this? Why?
There have been moments. It's a bit of a roller coaster ride,
of course, doing
something like this. I'm very thankful that I've had some experience of media and junkets and everything else while promoting films, because I don't think I think I'd been entirely out of my depth otherwise.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a sort of like an emotional and psychological aspect to speaking up like this. I mean, I don't have. Obviously, The Guardian, The Times, BBC News. I've spoken to them all. They've been fantastic sort of in getting the story out. So yeah, of course I have their support. I don't have any lawyers. I don't have any spokespeople. I don't have any PR people working in my court, which I think probably Nigel Farage does. I did actually get contacted by a crisis management PR company the other day, and I sort of said, I think actually you should probably be talking to Nigel Farage.
This is not my crisis. Yes, I hear you. I'm going to read you a message from one of my listeners that came in earlier today when I mentioned that you would be joining us. He says, imagine being bullied in such a hideous way. This is from Kevin. And then having to see your bully every day in the media, creeping about like some scheming modern-day Uriah Heep-style parasite, and then finding the strength that it takes to face up to this vile history of lies and to go public with what you know. I have huge respect for you, Peter. That's from Kevin. He's not alone. Quite a few people have made that point today. That's, of course, not why you did it. You did it, in a sense, not to bring the spotlight down on yourself, but to shift it back to him. You mentioned lawyers, which is interesting. I'm going to play you a clip. I know you've heard it before, of Richard Tice being interviewed on the Today programme yesterday by Emma Barnett, a Jewish woman who, of course, Farage elected yesterday to call lower grade. You can make of that what you will, but just let me remind you of this.
You've just said that a man who's in his own right a director and producer, he's not a political operative, you just said he's lying.
Yes.
But you don't know that. So you're lying within your lie, potentially.
No, I just don't think. I think this is made up twaddle by a whole bunch of people.
He said
with
it for years, and he has witnesses.
I think these people have a political axe to grind. And do you know, every week the voters are going out in by-elections and they're voting for reform because they're not buying into this sort of left-wing anti-Nigel narrative.
And that's extraordinary. And that might be a moment when you might think about calling lawyers.
I have actually been called by lawyers and said, look, you know, you've got a case for defamation, for suing him for defamation here. This was before Mr. Tice yesterday.
Gosh.
I kind of feel a bit sorry for Mr. Tice. I mean, you know, he was kind of thrown under the bus by Nigel Farage.
Sending him out to defend him when he was still in hiding himself.
Yes, and then I believe sort of like refusing to endorse Mr. Tice's comments in his own press conference yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, here's my feeling about all of this. I know I'm telling the truth. There are now, in the initial reporting, there were 20 people, many of whom corroborated my story and added to experience of their own. That number has now risen to 28. I'm jokingly referring to them as the Dulwich 28. So, you know, we are, by the way, we have not been in touch with each other, and certainly not before any of the initial reporting was done. And so all of this testimony has been independently sourced. It would be an amazing operation if it really was a conspiracy to smear. A quite remarkable operation, and I don't think any of us is up for that. So it's not a lie. The repeated attempts to sort of smear us as liars or kind of diminish what we experienced and also diminish the anger that we all feel with Farage going out and continuing to deny things. I think that's why we're here.
Indeed, continuing to deny things, although it's becoming increasingly hard to know what he's denying and what he's passing off as sort of Bernard Manning-like commentary or as inoffensive racism or somehow whatever that is, or inoffensive anti-Semitism. So the first line of his response to us last week was, I can tell you categorically that I did not say the things that have been published in The Guardian, aged 13, nearly 50 years ago. Just for clarification, it wasn't just when he was 13.
No,
a lot of this stuff went on well into the sixth form.
I mean, you know, I was really struck by the reporting because for me it was a personal experience that was really concentrated in my first year when we sat next to each other basically in class. And as soon as he found out, well, as soon as he heard my surname, Ettedgui, and found out that I had Jewish heritage, he was on my case for the rest of the year. And initially it was shocking and brutal. I mean, I'd never experienced any kind of prejudice before, really. I haven't really experienced it since then.
Good.
So you know, yeah, it was pretty hideous.
Did you tell your parents?
You know, I didn't.
Okay.
And I've kind of like been asked about this before, and I kind of thought, well, maybe what was going on there? And I think, my parents had built a business up from nothing. And they had really saved hard and invested a great deal in the education of myself and my brother, which included sending us to Dulwich. And I kind of think that there must have been some sort of aspect of me not wanting to sort of let down all that work that I knew at the time that they'd done.
Yeah.
And I knew that I was very privileged to be going to that school, and that was due to their hard work. So I didn't talk to them about it until much, much, much later. So I didn't.
What do you want Farage to do now? What I mean, what I don't know if the word satisfy is appropriate in this context.
I suppose that, as I say, I and many others came forward because of the denials and the sort of starting off once upon a time telling me to go to gas chambers, and now in the modern era kind of gaslighting us, I guess.
Yeah.
And I suppose my big thing was that I wanted that to be out there. What he did with it is not really my concern, I have to say.
Yes.
I mean, if now, having done all of these denials, he suddenly has a sort of Damascene conversion and remembers everything and says, I'm really sorry. Well, I guess it would satisfy a lot of people and think, good on you, Nigel, you've done the right thing there. But would I believe that was a sincere apology? I'm not sure. So, as I say, I'm not really that bothered. I think it would be great if he kind of came out and said that any anti-Semitic abuse, any racist abuse and prejudice against your fellow citizens is a vile and terrible thing and to be condemned. I think it would be fantastic if he said something like that. But
a bit tricky for him, given what he's, his associations with people like Andrew Tate and comments about them being part of a similar phenomenon. But
yes.
would it just on an emotional level, if he accepted that your memories are accurate, would that mean anything to you, or are you? I sense you might have moved on from that.
I've moved way on from that.
Right.
I mean, as I said to you earlier, I was concerned that initially that if I spoke up, I wouldn't be believed. It would be my word against his. No one would corroborate me. Now I've had so much corroboration from.
You're a bit surprised by the scale of this. I think
I'm totally surprised by it.
Why?
Because I didn't realise it was being clocked in the way it was. It was sort of so, it was so personal and directed, I felt, at me. And I did hear him occasionally sort of saying things like, go home, calling people or whatever. Sorry.
I think I did we... I'm going to apologise for those words, but but I fully understand why you've used it.
Yeah.
I'm
sorry, actually.
No, you're remembering words that were used at the time by...
So I heard that sort of thing, but I didn't think that anyone would necessarily step up, and I didn't want to put pressure on the one or two people that I knew from that time and ask them to support me if they didn't actually do it voluntarily. So I think over the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've been absolutely overwhelmed by the extent of the corroboration and also just the general response, the email that you read out a little bit earlier.
There's a lot of that coming.
I've had so many of those. And I've had, the other thing that I would say is a lot of people saying thank you for speaking out. And they're saying thank you because they're scared. They're scared of what Britain might become in the hands of someone like Nigel Farage.
I think a lot of us are. 4 minutes after 12, I just reiterate that apology for the two of the words. Obviously, we're both very sorry if you are offended by that.
I apologise as well.
Thank you, Peter. A quick word on some of the interview Richard Tice gave yesterday. That line we just heard about it being some sort of political conspiracy. I'm going to presume, I went to public school as well, that Dulwich College is not in the habit of turning out lefties, legions of lefties. If it is, there might be some parents who are currently considering applying for a refund.
Absolutely. I find it extraordinary that Dulwich College has been silent through all of this.
Yes, of course.
You know, someone was telling me the other day that he was actually president of the Old Elanian Golf Club. I don't know if that's true or not, by the way, but I was told. So and that he still does have links to the school, and you know. I'm surprised that the school have said nothing. What I would say, if I may, is that, you know, the people who have all come out and talked and given their testimony, they are doctors working in the NHS. They are scientists. They work in like me, in entertainment, in finance, in the law. Some are in politics, and I think that we all came out of Dulwich in the 1970s and moved into the 80s and the 90s, and we were all part of building a new kind of Britain, a much more, perhaps, tolerant, diverse Britain, but one where there was genuine opportunity, and we've all kind of like become part of communities, built our own families, you know, and it's very distressing to think, you know, that we might be dragged back to the 70s, to that era where, you know, as Farage pointed out yesterday, you know, there were comedians like Bernard Manning. I kind of think the sort of racist and misogynistic language of some of those comedians, it's very apt that he picked on Bernard Manning. I think that kind of prejudice is becoming normalised again. People are feeling less scared about name-calling.
Yes, I mean, which I suppose leads us and finally to the front page of the Daily Mail this morning, which has accused or claimed that the Reform UK leader has turned the tables on the BBC by citing It Ain't Half Hot, Mum, in the context of the...
I mean, come on, this is so rich. Without the BBC, Farage would be nothing.
That's true.
I mean, you know, I think he has to take the rough with the smooth. The BBC have been more than fair in giving him a platform on Question Time and generally on TV. And I know this because whenever he has come on TV, and I love Question Time, but whenever I saw him on Question Time, I had to switch the TV off because his voice, his posture, he is so exactly... reminds me today of the Farage that said those things.
It's triggering
back then.
The modern word, triggering, but...
The modern word is indeed triggering. I think we have to be careful about using such woke terms, James.
Of course we do, Peter. Of that we can all happily agree. Peter Ettedgui, thank you. Lots more messages coming in, very much of the same tone as the one I read out to you earlier from Kevin. So thank you for your time today. Just to pick up on one thing I said, actually, about Andrew Tate, who Nigel Farage has indeed praised for being an important voice for the emasculated and giving boys, in his own words, perhaps a bit of confidence at school. He spoke in favour of Tate for defending male culture in a Strike It Big podcast that aired in February, while also acknowledging that the influencer had gone over the top, and elsewhere that he had said some pretty horrible things, although they have, of course, been photographed together. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The time now, I'll just read you one, actually. What a wonderful man. I'm so sorry for his suffering. I can really relate to him. Well said, Peter. Honesty, it proves if this man can't be Prime Minister, if he can't acknowledge what he did to you, he needs to be exposed before he harms us all in number 10. Thank you for speaking out against this evil. And finally, from Amit, although we both stand by our apologies, as a person of colour, I don't mind Peter using those words in this context. Context is everything for me. It's 12:08.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12 minutes after 12 is the time. What a lovely man. I can tell you, I don't know if you won't have been able to see that yet. You may be able to see some of that interview later. But when he said that he felt sorry for Richard Tice, I just want you to know that it wasn't in any way tongue-in-cheek. Or I do kind of know what he means as well. When you see someone utterly ill-equipped for the public space, utterly ill-equipped, and thinking that he can kind of adopt the tactics of his pal, but he's not very good at it, and ends up, as you heard, veering very, very probably into the areas of defamation and libel. It's because he's just not very I don't know, sharp and then thrown under a bus by Farage yesterday. I just want you to know that wasn't in any sense meant as a sort of tongue-in-cheek dig. An extraordinary response to that conversation, and I'm not surprised, actually. As I said, I met Peter in 2019. I've had no contact with him since, but I was struck by that evolution of exposure that he's been through, the idea that a time has now come that I can't be quiet about this because this man has designs upon Downing Street, and it is very hard not to conclude that he hasn't changed at all since the days that he was doing the things that Peter has described to you. 13 minutes after 12 is the time. Just another apology for two of the words that Peter used in his recollections of what was routinely said by Nigel Farage at his school, because, of course, as we are all reflecting lately, that the world has turned and the world has changed since then. But as many of you were pointing out to me, context is everything. And the reason why those words have such a hefty resonance is precisely why they are no longer acceptable in common parlance for almost all of us. 14 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm minded to move on to something completely different now. I think that in some ways Peter provided a full stop, for now at least, to the conversation that we have been having thus far. And there is a rather nice story, would you believe, in the news that we may get our teeth into shortly. A story, very unexpectedly, about an uptick in teaching applications. But before that, I suppose, as being respectful and responsible, we should remind ourselves what Nigel Farage had to say yesterday with regard to some of these allegations. Should we hear it from his own mouth, or shall I remind you? So here he is commenting yesterday on some of the things that Peter has just been sharing with us.
This morning, Richard Tight said on the radio, he was asked about the comments made by schoolmates of yours who have said that the comments you made they viewed as racist and offensive. He said that they were lying. You have said before that you did make comments, made them banter, it wasn't directly racist. So Richard Tyson's wrong.
I thought this morning's performance by one of your lower grade presenters on the Today programme was utterly disgraceful. I think to frame a question around the leader of Reform's relationship with Hitler, which is how she framed it, was despicable, disgusting, beyond belief. Are you surprised that 500,000 people every year refuse to pay the licence fee? But let me say this to you. The double standards and hypocrisy of the BBC are absolutely astonishing. At the time I was alleged to have made these remarks, one of your most popular weekly shows was the Black and White Minstrels, right? The BBC were very happy to use blackface. Oh, and not just in the Black and White Minstrels, you did it in It Ain't Half Hot Mum as well. And what about Alf Garnett? Do you remember what he called Marigold? Do you remember the word he used to describe Marigold on not live, but on primetime national TV? I better not repeat the word, otherwise you'll all use it and say that I used it. Homophobia? It ain't half hot, Mum. Are you being served? Oh, and what about Bernard Manning? Perfectly happy at exactly the same time for Bernard Manning to appear on primetime national BBC comedy, telling jokes for which these days you'd probably get a knock at the door from our thought police and perhaps get a 31-month prison sentence. I cannot put up with the double standards of the BBC about what I'm alleged to have said 49 years ago and what you were putting out on mainstream content. So I want an apology from the BBC for virtually everything you did throughout the 1970s and 80s. And I will respond to your direct question. I've received many letters over the course of the last few days from people that I was at school with. This one I think is particularly relevant. I was a Jewish pupil at Dulwich College at the same time, and I remember him very well. While there was plenty of macho, tongue-in-cheek schoolboy banter, it was humour. And yes, sometimes It was offensive, rather like most of the BBC's output, but never with malice. I never heard him racially abuse anyone. If he had, he would have been reported and punished. He wasn't. The news stories are without evidence except for belatedly politically dubious recollections from nearly half a century ago. Back in the 1970s, the culture was very different. Perhaps Dame you should reflect on that. Especially at Dulwich. Lots of boys said things they'd regret today, or just laugh at. Whilst Nigel stood out, he was neither aggressive nor a racist. If I can help in any way, let me know. And I've had plenty of those messages over the course of the last few days, and I'm sick to death of the double standards and hypocrisy, above all, of your organisation. And what happened on the Today programme this morning was a complete bloody disgrace. Next, Sam Coates from Sky News. No, I'm done with you, thank you.
Well, my question was, he said they were lying.
Sam Coates from Sky. I'm really, until you apologise for all of your output, your appalling output, at the same time that I'm accused of saying these things which I deny, I'm not speaking to you. All right?
Again, I mean, which bits does he deny? And which bits is he saying are okay because Bernard Manning was around at the time? I don't know. But anyway, for the avoidance of doubt and for utter clarity, here is the response to the allegations that Nigel Farage gave us last week. I can tell you categorically that I did not say the things that have been published in The Guardian aged 13 nearly 50 years ago. So nothing about the things that Peter says he did aged 18. But Farage goes on, isn't it interesting? I'm probably the most scrutinised figure in British politics, having been in public life for 32 years. Several books and thousands of stories have been written about me, but it is only now that my party is leading in the poll that these allegations come out. Again, I mean, that's not true. That's not me expressing an opinion, that's me counting. I will leave the public to draw their own conclusions about why that might be. Can you draw conclusions about things that aren't true? I don't know, except perhaps about the person telling the untruths. We know that The Guardian wants to smear anybody who talks about the immigration issue, do we? But the truth is that I have done more in my career to defeat extremism. This is brilliant. The truth is I have done more in my career to defeat extremism and far-right politics than anybody else in the UK, from my time fighting the BNP right up to today. Many of those making these statements just happen to be political opponents. One, for example, is the current chair of the Salisbury Lib Dems. This is not the first time the desperate establishment has come after me, and it will not be the last. So again, I can categorically say that the stories being told about me from 50 years ago are not true. Which makes it all the odder then that he spent yesterday shouting about it ain't half hot mum and Bernard Manning. But hey-ho. What do we know?
James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 12 is the time, and I think we'll do a sort of cleanse now for the last sort of 40 minutes or so that we get to spend together this week. When's the last time a story stopped you in your tracks? I suppose if it's a statistical story, the one that should have stopped you in your tracks would be the net migration figures. And the fact that they have plummeted, which prompted all the people who've been demanding that net migration figures plummet to have a moment of epic confusion when they didn't know what to do. So someone threw them a bone that said, it's all because British people are leaving because they're so angry with Rachel Reeves, the schoolgirl chess champion. And that turned out later not to be true. But of course, none of the people who spent the day shouting that this is nothing to do with immigration falling, everything to do with Brits leaving. The fascinating research I saw is people who've actually become British citizens, despite being born, or, you know, who were born elsewhere, are now leaving to go back to their countries of origin and taking with them their British-born partners and, of course, their British-born children in many cases. So the net migration figures are going to be fascinating to us non-racists for years to come. But as they continue to plummet, given the discourse that this country suffers from at the moment, you could be forgiven for being profoundly shocked to discover that you live in a country where the numbers are coming down at a rate of knots and not going up on a daily basis. But that's not what we're talking about now. These statistics stopped me in my tracks. Genuinely. I love words like surge, words that only really appear in newspaper copy. I once made a list of words that only ever appear in newspaper copy. You never hear anybody using the word romp in real life. I don't even know if newspapers use the word romp anymore since the News of the World ceased to exist. But the only place in which you could ever read about a romp, no one would ever say, hello, darling. Do you fancy a romp? No one ever used the word romp except in tabloid speak. And surge is a little bit like that. Not tabloid, but newspaper. It's a surge. There's been a surge in the number of people. I've given you a clue as to what I'm about to say, but I'll give you another one now. The number of people training to be teachers. Experts have said that teaching was attracting more graduates because starting salaries had risen and the profession was seen as AI-proof. In other words, jobs are less vulnerable to replacement by AI than in other industries. There are still staff shortages, severe staff shortages across the entire sector, and 1 year of better recruitment was not going to improve the long-standing problem. But if the oil tanker is being turned around, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Teachers and doctors and nurses, professions in which you are routinely attacked, of course, whenever you stand up for your terms and conditions. But look what happens when your terms and conditions are improved. Shortages shrink. Numbers increase. The profession becomes more attractive. And that is, of course, of a benefit to all of us. I mean, let alone the children who are actually being taught. We all want to have a better educated, better looked after population. Subject targets have now been met in maths, chemistry, biology, English, history, geography, art and design and PE. We're still missing, but they're up, even in classics, religious education and drama. The number of physics recruits has risen to 77% from 30%. And very gratifyingly, in modern foreign languages, it rose from 42% to 93%. So one of the rare areas of romps and surges. David asks whether we are returning to erotic fiction written by Reform UK politicians. Not until next week, David. One of the few areas, given how often we spend our time together chronicling decline and worrying and wondering about what on earth we can do about it, while so much political energy is being dedicated to problems that are either exaggerated or non-existent, here is a quiet success story. More money for teachers, starting salaries, means that the profession is becoming a lot more attractive. Fears of AI taking away other entry-level jobs makes sense when you think about it, because it can't take over teaching, they say, at which AI laughs in the background in a sort of moo-ha-ha-ha kind of fashion. You think I can't come for your teaching jobs? Let me introduce you to robo-teacher. But at the moment, the perception is that these are not jobs that are going to be replaced by AI. And the data shows massive increases right across the board, with starting salaries for undergraduates being a particular area of interest. How do you want to do this? There are two obvious ways. Would you like to come on my masterclass in being a radio phone-in host? There are two obvious ways in which we can explore this story together. Do you know what they are? Can you think what they are? One is really, really obvious. So we'll do that first, shall we? Why have you decided to become a teacher in the last sort of 2 or 3 years? We don't need to confine ourselves to the specific cohort contained within this research. But why? Why have you decided? I just want to know why you've decided to become a teacher. Because if this was 5 or 10 years ago, you probably wouldn't have done, or you would have been much less likely to follow through with it. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060973. The second bit, and in some ways, well, when I say to you this is the bit I'm looking forward to more, you very often confound me. So I'll ask you 2 questions, and I'll think the second question is more interesting than the first. You'll ring in to answer the first question. I'll think, actually the first question was more interesting than the second question all along. But the second question is for people who are and have been teachers. The amount of times, and this is actually a moment of reflection as well, thinking about the difference between pessimism and optimism, between glass half full and glass half empty. The number of reasons, the number of occasions upon which I've asked you to, as a teacher of some years standing, to tell me why you wouldn't want a younger person to follow you into your profession? Or perhaps more often and more pertinently, why, if you had your time again, you wouldn't have wanted to be a teacher? We have tracked decline in the classroom and the terms and conditions of teachers forensically over the years that we have spent together. So much so that there's only 3 or 4 subjects where I've got actual favourite callers, people I can think of immediately who often ring me on the same sort of subject with insights and expertise that I would be lost without. And I can think of them on this question. And some of them would have actually been swimming in the opposite direction and trying to talk up teaching while I was sort of saying, well, you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy given what they have to put up with in classrooms now. What would you say in answer to the question of why young people should go into teaching? So you, as a grizzled old scholar in your mortarboard and gown, are speaking directly through me, through LBC, to young graduates or final year university undergraduates who are weighing up their options, and against all our expectations perhaps, teaching is looking like an ever more attractive possibility. I want you to tell them why they should do it. Why should young people now turn to teaching in ways that you wouldn't necessarily have recommended 10 years ago, or that you would have done all along? Because the rewards of teaching are not obviously measurable or easily measurable, are they? I'm doing one of those lovely Friday soft focus things, aren't I? I just want you to tell me about being a teacher and why it's a wonderful thing to do, okay? 0345 6060 973. I've done it the other way round, but I don't want to do that today. I don't want you to tell me about a wonderful teacher you had. I want you to tell me about why teaching is a job that we should be both more appreciative of and more sympathetic to. So as we celebrate the extraordinary news, it completely blindsided me. More than 32,000, an uptick of 11%, so it qualifies as a proper surge. It's down a bit on pre-pandemic levels, but my goodness me, this graph is climbing. The number of people training to be teachers has surged. Why, now that you've been doing it for a few years, or you've been doing it for 50 and you've retired, how would you sell it? Tell me why being a teacher is a brilliant thing to do with your life. There it is, there's the question. Why is being a teacher a brilliant thing to do with your life? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It depends on how many calls I get coming at it from the positive angle on whether or not I will allow anybody coming at it from a negative angle to come on. I've done more than enough talking today, so I'd quite like to put my feet up, sit back and listen to you on this one. But if nobody rings me to tell me why it's brilliant being a teacher, then I will have no choice but to put people on who are telling me why it's awful being a teacher. But I don't want to do that today. I just want you to tell me, and indeed any potential future teacher listening, why it is one of the most brilliant things you can do with your life, because we've never had that phone in before, and I'm beginning to think that we should have done. It's 12:32 and Amelia Cox is here with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:35 is the time. I know what you're thinking. It is possible to have too much of a good thing, so I could only apologise for inflicting an advert for me on you during a programme presented by me. But it is a brilliant series, full disclosure, and there are some absolute humdingers both in the archive and to come. Jan Ravens today of Dead Ringers fame and sundry other magnificent entertainments, and I got up early yesterday. Who do you think I got up early to interview? In fact, I'll give you 2 clues as to who I interviewed yesterday, for full disclosure. Number 1, I got up early, and number 2, when Mrs. O'Brien said to me, why are you getting up early? And I said, I'm going in to do a full disclosure. And she said, who? And I told her who. She said, oh, really? Tell him that I love him, which has never happened before. And I mean, hopefully will never happen again, to be honest with you. But who on earth would have inspired such enthusiasm from Mrs. O'Brien? And I'll tell you what, I'll make it even more... I'll give you a clue that makes it even more remarkable that it prompted that response. It's somebody from the world of sport. So somebody from the world of sport, a sports person, well, a man, obviously, because I just said tell him that I love him. But who on earth from the worlds of sport would have prompted Mrs. O'Brien to say, tell him that I love him? And guess what? I did. Teaching. There's so much negativity around that you could be forgiven for wondering why or how on earth the number of people training to be teachers has surged in the past year. I'm interested in the why, but I'm also interested in the why it's a great career, why it's a wonderful job to do. It's a conversation we almost certainly should have had sooner. Jordan is in Liverpool. Jordan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome.
Cheers. So, I can only really speak for my own teaching career. I'm 4 years in.
Oh, yeah.
And my specialty is music, or secondary music. Now, it's an interesting thing in music because it's also disparately provisioned across the country. When you get in a school and you get to put the time in to build a child to be someone who was scared to put the hand up in a class to being a full-throated performer at like a musical or something at the end of the school production year, there's no high like it.
and that's something they're going to keep and treasure for the rest of their life, regardless of what they do next. To take somebody who can't say boo to a goose, and then after a term of teaching or after a term of rehearsals is itching to get on a stage in front of an audience and belt out a tune or belt out a solo. That must actually, I mean, it's an obvious one, isn't it? But now you've actually said it out loud, I'm getting quite dewy-eyed about it. It's a beautiful thing. Can you remember the first time it happened? Because you've not been doing it that long.
No, the first time was with the school that I was in before changing schools. We did a school production of Joseph, and we did an open cast call and what have you, and it took a lot of pushing to get this particular couple of kids to do it. And for whatever reason, they were very apprehensive about it, whatever. They didn't really have a foot in like the music or drama crew at the time.
Okay.
So it was a completely new world for them. And we were like, you do well in class, you know, give it a go. If you don't like it, the worst you can say is you tried and didn't like it. But it ended up being that they would be like some of the first people to come to rehearsals after school in their own time, be there helping us set up the stage, never mind actually rehearsing their parts. So it's watching the change.
That's magic.
And it can happen as well as a half term.
And it changes their relationship with school and schooling as well. Find something in school that you're enthusiastic about, and you are measurably more enthusiastic about school, full stop.
Exactly, yeah.
I love that. Were they brothers? Did you cast them as two of the brothers?
No, they were. One of them ended up being one of the brothers, and one of them was for so long. One of them was like just a minor ensemble part.
Okay, I was going to write. It's one of my all-time favourite musicals. That I could probably run through every single part in it. Potiphar. You got the baker and the butler. That's a lovely little scene, isn't it? When he's in prison, you've got. I love that song. I can't sing, mate, but I tell you what, it brings the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and every single time anybody breaks into the prison song. Breaks into the close every door to me. There it is. Why did you do it? Why did you decide to become a teacher?
Well, to begin with, rather selfishly, it was I hit the point in my technician career that I couldn't get any more money and I wanted to start a family. So, like, okay, let's have a go at teaching. I'm in school already anyway.
Yeah.
And there was just, like, in the first training year, it was quite a full-on teacher training course that I had to do, one of the more difficult ones.
Right.
And there was... I can't really explain. There was quick wins, if you get what I mean.
I do.
There was, even though the kids didn't know me, there was people that you could just see there was something, and then you would teach them in a certain way that makes them come out of the shell bit by bit. And those quick wins really push you on.
Oh, mate, beautiful, perfect start. Thank you, and good luck. Take care. And that is the reason why you do it, I suppose, to see a caterpillar turn into a butterfly, to use a slightly laboured analogy, but it wouldn't have happened without you. That's it. I think everybody has thought about teaching at some point. I mean, how could you not? You're so bored in the classroom, you think about anything. As a kid, that is a very odd memory that just popped into my mind, which I may share with you before the end of the programme, but I may not. I've probably shared it with you before. I've shared most of my memories with you at some point. But you will. We all think, because you know exactly what a teacher does, so you can imagine doing it. It's not like imagining some job that you have no clue about. Everybody knows exactly what a teacher does, or everybody thinks they know. So you sit there and think, could I be a teacher? Would I be one of those ones that was trying too hard to be a friend, or would I be too much of a disciplinarian? I don't know. But that's a lovely thing. That's why you do it. Christine is in West Malling. Is it how do you pronounce that, Christine?
It's Malling.
It is Malling, West Malling. What would you like to say, Christine?
Hi, James. Long-time listener and on maternity leave, so you've got me through maternity leave. I've been able to listen to you every morning, so thank you so much.
Lucky you, eh? Amazing.
I just wanted to say that I'm 10 years in, and I'm actually going to visit a new school this afternoon.
Wow.
But I became a teacher because I'm black and a female, obviously, and growing up, the only teachers I saw that looked like me were supply teachers.
Okay, gosh.
So I've always kept the mantra of be what you want to see, make an impact. So now, 10 years in, I've met lots of people from different backgrounds that are teachers. I've trained students that are from different backgrounds. And I think it's really important, no matter what the media says, parents are overly very supportive.
Right.
And you get that back from the support and the care, and parents really appreciate what you do for them. We can only do so much with shrinking budgets and things like that. But just being a role model, and even seeing children once they've left school and they come back to see you, and you don't realise the impact that you have on those children's lives until later on, maybe.
And then, I mean, most of us don't do that, do we? We don't actually go back and tell teachers. We might talk about them. We might tell our own children about amazing teachers that we've had. So one of the things I do in full disclosure is I always try, most people do it without prompting, but if they don't mention the name of the teacher that changed their life, I always try and get them to do it, because it's I don't know why I do that actually, but it's lovely, isn't it, when you hear that connection across the ages.
Absolutely. And there's one teacher that inspired me. I managed to get in contact with her, but she inspired me to study history at university. Wow. So it's all swings and roundabouts. To be able to meet her in a network again was just amazing. So,
of course, I love that. And you're going back after maternity leave?
Yeah, well, I'm even going back today to visit a new school, so it's just quite nice. I thought I'd ring in.
And to a young person thinking of it, you'd say what?
I would say you've got the job stability, you've got, obviously, holidays is a benefit. You are a manager, you are a leader in the classroom, and no 2 days are the same.
Oh, that's a nice.
And that's what they say. Like other jobs that I've done before, you can never say that the day before was the same. And the children are amazing. That's the main thing. Being in a lesson and seeing that light bulb moment, so to speak, it is amazing.
And speaking of children, I think there's one there demanding your attention. I shall detain you no longer, Christine. That's a lovely thing to say. I mean, if you want to change things, and it's not a highfalutin or a pompous ambition. It's a beautiful human impulse just to want to make things better. What do? You become a doctor. You make people better. You literally make people better. Some of us went into journalism naively believing that it might make the world a better place, or that you could improve people's lives. And teaching actually is the most obvious one of all, isn't it? You've got a classroom in front of you of clay almost, of things that you can help mould, things that you can help grow. And yet I live in a country where, as Christine just alluded to, for the best part of 20 years, every time I've seen the word teachers in a news story, it's either been about industrial action or about collapses in morale, or possibly, I mean, the only time that some of the newspapers get interested in schools or in teachers is when they've got an opportunity to inflame one of their ludicrous culture war moments, none of which recognises the beauty of being a teacher. No one's guessed correctly. I thought I might have accidentally told you yesterday who I'd interviewed, but I haven't. It's not Gary Lineker, who is by far the most popular suggestion, although he is a guest on Full Disclosure in February of next year, live on stage at the Royal Geographic Society. I have no idea whether there are any tickets left. I know we sold the ground floor out on the morning that I mentioned it to you, but I think there's some upstairs bits if you want to come along to that. I'm sure that there are links on the LBC website. Apologies in advance if it's already sold out and I'm flogging you essentially a dead horse, but it's certainly not Eddie the Eagle. 3 people have suggested that when I told Mrs. O'Brien who I was getting up early to interview yesterday from the world of sport, and she responded by saying, tell him that I love him, that somehow it would have been Eddie the Eagle. It's not Eddie the Eagle, and it's not David Beckham. It's not Gary Lineker. It's not Chris Kamara. She's not, this is the point, she's not a massive football follower. So it wouldn't. Oh, I've given you another clue there, haven't I? It's not just sport; it's also football, and it's not Gary Lineker. I think it's getting obvious now.
James O'Brien on LBC.
12:49 is the time, and it's not Joe Root, Lee. You wombat. Joe Root is in Australia playing cricket. The idea that I got up early to interview him in the middle of his innings yesterday, that would be stretching it. It's not Eric Cantona. I've done him before, not on this particular podcast series, on a previous one that I did. That was extraordinary. Phil Tufnell. I would quite like to do Phil Tufnell. Gary Neville, he's very much on my list, but it's not him. It's Sir Gareth Southgate, coming soon to a Full Disclosure episode near you, and he absolutely lived up to Mrs. O'Brien's enthusiasms. A lovely bloke and a really really lovely interview. This week's episode of Full Disclosure is with Jan Ravens, also a truly lovely person with a fantastic story to tell, and one of those careers that has been up and down various avenues, but which kind of achieved a new level of recognition when she started on Dead Ringers, originally on the radio, then on the telly, now on tour. Even features some absolute no mark off the radio called James O'Brien these days. I think John Coleshaw does that impression. But I am fascinated by impressions. I think we all are. And it starts in the classroom, oddly enough, given that we're talking about teaching. What an amazing facility it is. And some people can just do it and do almost everyone. And the massive majority of us can't do anyone. So I kind of wondered what it's like to discover that you have the ability.
Bill is such a good... Was sadly lost.
Of course.
But he was such a great script guy, you know, and he was quite daring. You know, he was quite maverick in that way.
Because it was like nothing that had come before, was it? Even though elements of it had happened before.
He wanted
this
it
was
to
magic.
he wanted it to be spitting image on the radio.
Yes.
So he wanted it.
So it's scabrous and scurrilous.
Yeah, I mean, it did start off. It started off much more kind of like a sort of quite Radio 4-y, you know. It was all, you know, BBC Radio 4. I'm Charlotte Green. You know, it was all kind of, you know, all that stuff. But then it, you know, and then we quite quickly got onto telly. But I knew it was going to be good, and I was the only woman in it, and sort of, you know. Again, you know, I felt this sort of pressure as a feminist. You know, we've got to get, you know, some better female characters on this. You know, it was like Posh Spice, you know, a secretary, Thatcher, you know, whatever.
Sure.
And so I was always trying to get Bill to, you know, to put in more of the sort of female politicians, even though they... You know, they weren't cutting through that much. It was people like, you know, Tessa Jowell or, you know, Hazel Blears or Harriet Harman and, you know, but there were also people like Claire Short, you know, Claire Short who speaks like this because Tony Blair has wired her jaw together. And so she doesn't make any more indiscreet remarks about Iraq. And Anne Widdecombe, who was always a good character. Yeah. And then... And so, and I realised that, you know, there weren't that many politicians that he was going to put. So I sort of thought I've got to make characters out of the news readers as opposed to the newsmakers. So I worked on all these characters, you know, for the news readers. And then I kind of thought, you know, what are these programmes that, you know, none of the guys were writing material about, you know, things like changing rooms or location. And I said, you know, half the population at least is watching these programmes.
Yeah, it's a real cultural marking point.
Yeah. And so I got all those characters in, you know. So I gradually started getting characters in that they were doing all the sports commentators. I mean, it was extraordinary, really, the way it was, you know, sort of polarised like that. I mean, because this is like, you know, it's only 25 years ago. It doesn't seem like that long.
Why did we find it all? It's almost a mystery hour question. Why are we so utterly charmed by impressions? I do not know. I do know. I meant to tell you, I've been enjoying a new crime drama on Channel 5 called Cooper and Fry. It's based on books. But some of the accents in that are extraordinary, as in not necessarily in a good way. One or two of the accents do sound to me a little bit off the mark, and every now and then they seem to Anyway, it's a wonderful show, so I should be praising it, not criticising it, which is what we're doing with teachers. I come here to praise teachers, not to bury them. Paul's in Braintree. Paul, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
So I was just saying to the reason I phoned in is I've just started my teacher training year. Previously, I was lecturing at university for the last decade.
Wow.
And before that, I'm a retired police officer. And I've been involved in teaching and training in various guises, probably for about 30 years with adults.
So what prompted you to make this jump then? How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, 53.
Yes.
So I'm a little bit older than most of my cohort anyway. Yes. But I think a couple of things have made it possible.
Go on.
One, the higher education sector is going through a bit of a tough patch.
Oh, that's true, yes.
And the bursaries that the government have offered have made it possible for me to make the move because I've got kids at university, so there's still commitments there.
Yes.
But I just felt all the teaching I'd done previously had been to people who want to be in the classroom for various reasons.
Right.
And I just thought, as the opportunities presented itself, why not go back to school, and try and make a difference? I left school with 3 GCSEs, hated every minute of it, never enjoyed school. And I'm now currently doing a PhD in education and thought, it'll be a fairly easy transition. But the amount that I'm learning from, all the teachers that I'm working with is just phenomenal. And
have you been in front of a classroom of children yet?
Oh, yeah.
What's that like?
Pretty much, yeah. Being in front of the class isn't any different to, being in front of a group of people is being in front of a group of people.
Okay.
What's different about it, in my guise, is that, when you're lecturing, you've got an hour's worth of material that you've got to get through, and you get through that material. You try and make it engaging and all the rest of it. But everybody has been selected to be there in front of you, whether it's through their, A-level qualification. So
yeah, whereas with a classroom, it's a different dynamic entirely. And I would worry about disruption. That would be what I'd be thinking of.
Yeah, so what I find...
You are an ex-copper, though, so I suppose that helps.
No, I get that. But what I've genuinely...
You're not allowed to handcuff them, That's frowned upon these days.
But what I find for me is that often the disruption comes because you haven't planned the lesson quite right.
Okay. Keep them engaged, and you keep them engaged.
100%. If you've got the right materials there, you've got them presented in the right way, you keep them busy, don't give them a chance to be distracted, regularly changing activities so they're not doing anything for too long before you give them something else to do. Actually, I find that the majority of kids are pretty well behaved. Yes, there are always going to be some challenges, but that's the same in all walks of life. And we have bad days as well, don't we?
Well, speak for yourself, Paul. Yeah, of course we do. I'm cracking on. I just want to squeeze in one more, and I got an amazing text as well off Liz, which I will share with you shortly. It's almost Ray Liotta territory. But first, Sarah is in Slough. Paul, take care and good luck. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm also doing my teacher training. I'm in my
You sound a bit younger than Paul. I don't want to jump to any conclusions, but I think you might be at the other end of the cohort.
Yeah, I'm probably the youngest that you could train. I'm 21.
Wow.
I'm fresh out of my undergraduate degree, which was an actual law degree.
Yes.
So it's quite a pivot from my original career choices.
Yes. Why are you doing it? What made you make that jump, that leap?
I think, similar to what has been said, previous teachers, my teachers, they were great influences for me. I loved my primary school experience, which is why I'm going into primary school.
I love it.
But I have obviously heard negative things. A lot about the exhaustion. I will say, maybe because I'm younger, I haven't felt it yet. But
thanks.
But I am.
I'm shattered.
Yeah, but I'm also working part-time, but I honestly am really enjoying it. Every day I come back home, I have stories to tell, and similar to what's been said, there is a lot of disruption, especially in primary school.
Yes.
And I think it's also due to COVID influences.
Yes, of course.
Shorter attention spans.
But you're rolling with it, I sense. You're dealing with it. You're learning as well as you go on how to best address these sort of moments and issues.
Exactly. But it's quite difficult keeping them on task. But I am really enjoying it, and I don't see why anyone would say anything bad about it. Although there is quite a negative atmosphere around it, I'm really enjoying it.
Well, and that is, you are not alone, and I can see why. The appeal is the same as it has always been, but the government have made moves to make the actual decision a bit easier to make, whatever age you are, it would appear, if you're eligible. It's an increasingly attractive profession. That's cheered me up. No end, that story about an increase. I know it's not the beginning, or at least the end of the problem, and there are still shortages all over the shop, and some of the bursaries that were put in place to encourage people to go down certain paths have been taken away. But it's just a nice story, and goodness knows we don't have enough of them. And here is a very nice message from Liz in Willesden, who says, I was in the same class as Jan Ravens at school, and she was very good at copying teachers. I later became a teacher, and I had an amazing career involving trips to Iceland and New York. I thought it was just the kids who enjoyed the school trips more than the rest of it, Liz. I didn't realise it was the teachers as well, but it makes perfect sense. The highlight was running my own classroom at Keighley Cougars Rugby League Football Club. It's a great career with great opportunities. There you go. You heard it here. If not first, then certainly most enthusiastically. That's it from me for another day. A bit of a different show today, but I think quite a special one. If you missed any of it, you can listen back, or at least possibly, dare I say, an important one, on our free Global Player app, or indeed the new LBC app, where you can stay up to date with the top stories and opinions, put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily, James O'Brien Whole Show, James O'Brien's Full Disclosure, and apparently some other people present some as well. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4, but now on LBC, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.